Because truth is just truth. Truth isn't Jewish. Truth doesn't have a bar mitzvah and gefilte fish.
Right.
God isn't Jewish either.
Mysticism is powerful, it's moving, it's speaking a language that even if I clearly don't understand it, it's saying something to me. The amount of people I see who are using Kabbalah and mysticism as a tool to manipulate people into following them, and it's like we're better off thinking it's all bullshit and let's just neglect it. We seem to be doing a good job, but how do we be both rigorous and mystics? And
So I think it's definitely possible. I really do think that finding a rigorous and thoughtful and rational and empirical grounding for mysticism may be the most important thing to do in this moment, and I think that it's something which has been happening for the past few decades.
I shouldn't be wearing sunglasses. I feel like Andrew Tate if I'm wearing sunglasses in an episode. How long ago did you start Seekers of Unity channel?
I started, it must have been something like 3 years ago. I mean, I'd been working on it. It's funny that you mentioned like your own creative thought process. My initial idea was to write a book. I think there's a certain like age demographic where it's like we grew up on books as a primary medium, and we thought like we have ideas to share with the world because of things that we discovered in books, and what better way to do that than to write our own book. Right. And I was like thinking and writing and collecting and drafting. I think I even came up with like an introduction and a first chapter for probably what was like close to a decade, not consistently, but like on and off. And a friend of mine, Yitzhak Abusera, he was like, Zevi, you read books. Some of your friends read books, but no one's really reading books these days, which is not entirely true, but he's talking like from a market perspective, which is where has his strength. And he's like, Zevi, stop creating content online. Like the ideas that you're trying to flesh out in your book, stop putting them out in audio form, in video form. And it was terrifying, like to do the first video. I think the first upload is always the hardest for anyone trying to get into the space. But I did. It was like a short, just like a book review. It was like the least commitment that I could do. It's like, here, I read this book. These are my thoughts on it. And right away, like there was an interest, and people were looking for an intersection of really rigorous intellectual honesty and thoughtfulness and mysticism and meaning and existential themes. So that was about 3 years ago. I did it ironically because I was very lonely at the time. I had moved back home to Australia and I didn't really have many friends there. All my friends were married and overseas, and it was a way to put my hand up in a global conversation and to invite people into that conversation with me, which really worked, thank God, and I'm really glad that it worked. And then I was uploading sporadically, like once a month or so, not really following any trajectory, no series in mind. And then when I got back to Israel and COVID hit, a friend of mine here, Alyssa Siegel, she was like, Zevi, if you're going to do this, do it seriously. Upload once a week, have a format, have a series, like choose topics, go through them thoroughly so people can come and follow and learn something and not just a bit here and a bit there. And I hate to say this, but like the timing with COVID worked well because this is a bit noisy. Yeah. So it worked well. Everyone was stuck at home.
Hopefully it'll be the only part of this conversation that's a flop.
Good one. There is something poetic about like the sail catching the wind, or like, you know, moving somewhere. It's like the Baal Shem Tov's horse being driven off somewhere. So that's when I started to do it really consistently. So what's it been, like 2 years now since COVID started or something like that? Yeah, it's been a wild journey, and I have to say, I don't like, maybe not for an audience, but just for yourself, like thinking of going into this in a full-time way, there is something to be said about keeping your passion and your income separate. Because sometimes if people say if you love your work or you do what you love, you don't work a day in your life. But also you turn what you're most passionate about into something that you need to put bread to put bread on the table, and that may be a way to stifle or kill your passion. So I would give some thought about giving up other forms of income and just going directly into this.
From experience,
I'm speaking from experience. Yeah. I mean, I have a bit of a different setup where I have like extremely low living costs, being young and free and single and being very frugal in general. But anyway, something to consider for yourself.
Yeah, Like when I'm Joe Rogan big, like okay, it's one thing. Like okay, but even Joe Rogan has multiple sources of income.
Yeah.
It's not just his conversations.
It's good to keep those open and to keep like a bit more of a diverse.
Like Chazal says, do not use the Torah as a crown to dig with.
Correct.
Like it's
correct.
It's wild. Like it's not meant, like the Ramble in Hilchos Talmud Torah, like he just discusses how you're not allowed to, like oh, you shouldn't pay your teachers, like there's a certain, like they can't be using it as a means of parnasa.
Yeah.
Okay, we have all these loopholes, like if it's the culture and this is how people make money and you wouldn't be able to get a teacher otherwise, okay, then you could pay him. But ideally, like you shouldn't be using your passion, right? Your ultimate passion as a means of an income.
Yeah, it's a complex issue, and I think Rambam really represents that best because he spends most of his time as a doctor when on our metric, he should have been, working as a rabbi and teaching and preaching and writing. But there is something very important, both to protect the profession itself from corruption and from abuse, and also to protect the people that have that passion. So it's not stuff that it's a complex. And there are good arguments on both sides here, but there definitely is a very strong position in Judaism which argues against conflating passion, particularly when it comes to education.
I have this, like with. I don't know whether it's the influencer, like any influencer or coach who's offering courses on, like, here's how you can no longer be angry or anxious or whatever they're offering you. They find your pain point, right? We all have that. We all, like, it's wild. You can make an Instagram slide and every single person in the world will relate with every quote you have on there because you have some sense of existentialist human nature, and here I can offer you a solution, and all you have to do is buy my course. I'm like, wherever I see myself monetizing, I don't want it to be. There's I think it was his name, Alex Hermasi, or he's like a business, social media marketing guru, and his line is, "I have nothing to sell you," and it's true. He's like he's not offering any courses, not everything. He has a huge company that invests in startups and businesses, and so like, my aim is to make you as lucrative and financially successful as possible, that you'll come work with us and one day you'll be part of our portfolio. But there's a certain like authenticity that I'm just teaching, I'm just sharing the wisdom I've collected, I've had, and there's something like I love about that. Joe Rogan doesn't sell anything. Even Jordan Peterson, as soon as he switched to this explicitly financially capitalistic model, he leaned into his brand a little bit more. He solidified his identity. He's chosen to be a certain way. He signed up with the Daily Wire. There's certain, I don't know what it means to sell out, but we have this phrase, sell out. That's
it's a tricky thing, because on the one hand we want our creators and creatives and artists and visionaries to be able to not just be starving artists, because starving artists eventually aren't able to produce because
their work is only great when they're dead, so it's okay. It's fitting.
Which is a shame that they have to die for that to happen. And on the other hand, there's a real problem of that seller mentality, and there needs to be a way to find a balance where nothing's being sold. I mean, I feel very lucky because I don't really have many expenses, so none of my stuff is behind a paywall. None of my courses are. Everything that I make is available for free, and I'm not selling anything. And also there's a bit of like an anti-consumerist, anti-capitalist bend in like this intellectual milieu which I partake in. So it would feel wrong if I was like selling t-shirts and cups and stuff like that. But
I do hope to have a mug that people have in their house one day, though. So that's a goal.
I think if you're selling a mug so people can feel part of community and identity, and like it's part of like a marketing strategy for people to see you and talk about you and like get the idea out there, that's okay. But this sense where it becomes where the object that we're marketing is first and then our content is second, which you see sometimes with these creators. And I think it's very challenging, because I mean this is a general problem with social media as well, where the more antagonistic and aggressive and inflammatory and incendiary you are, which is why you see so many people sliding into politics, because it's really easy views and easy clicks. The algorithms don't seem to reward thoughtfulness and deliberation and doubt, and which is what we really need in this world, right? We don't need more incendiary pundits selling teacups. And there's also that economic lure where it's like, oh, I can sell a product and what I was, you know. But I think it's interesting. These are definitely interesting challenges, and I think we're in a lucky moment in history to be facing these challenges. The fact that we have the capacity to be having these global conversations. For me and you to sit down here, we connected because we both picked up our hands to partake in this global conversation.
Right.
And the fact that you can pull out your phone and we could share this with the world, and people can, I think it's, with all the challenges, I think it's an incredible opportunity.
Right. And it's, I mean, more than like a, when you say global conversation, like for me, it's like, what is it I'd like to do with my life? I look at history almost, or all, like, and what's to come as essentially a giant forum, a giant chat room of minds asking essentially the same questions over and over and over again, and there's people who've contributed more to the conversation or less, and like it's like I'd like to be somebody who, I don't know how it will be, where exactly, but I'd like to participate in this conversation. Like that's, like you look as an example of the Gamara, right? It's just a page of Gamara, and it looks like a back and forth conversation, but that's 700 years right there, and then forget Rashi and everybody else.
It's the original podcast.
Yeah, exactly. With it where you can call in, like the audience can call in.
Right.
So, what is a seeker of unity?
What is a seeker of unity?
Yeah.
It's a great question. I was sitting on my couch like the night before I uploaded the first video, and I was like, I need a name for this project. And I have a very close friend. He's been behind the scenes on much of the project, and the real tragedy of the project is that it's me who's front of shop and not my brilliant friends who really put me to shame in depth and knowledge. So this one friend of mine, Menachem Ladowitz, he was also talking about starting some sort of podcast or channel, which I've been nudging him to do for probably close to a decade, and he still hasn't done it, but hopefully he will. And he was thinking of calling it Seeking Crowns.
Seeking Crowns.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. There's a medrash, which I'm sure you're familiar with. When Moses receives the Torah from Sinai, he has this sort of this vision which flies him forward in history, and he's sitting in the classroom of Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages of the Talmud. And it's a very elaborate and complex and a midrash which is full of raw emotion and some very gruesome themes. But in one of the scenes in this vision that Moses has, God is sitting and attaching crowns to the letters of the Torah before, like preparing this gift it is going to give to the Jewish people through Moses, the bride, at Sinai. And before the gift is ready, he's like putting the final touches, and one of the final touches is the crowns on top of the letters, which we see in the Hebrew scribal arts and Sefirot. And Moses asks, why are you attaching these crowns? And he says that this person in the future, Akiva, who you see in the vision, he on every single crown, he's going to expound mountains and mountains of halacha, of ways of coming closer to God. And so Menachem was going to call these podcasts Seeking Crowns, continuing the work of Moses and Akiva and God, of expounding the crowns of the letters. What is it that sits above and adorns and crowns our spiritual practices, our Judaism, or whatever tradition we belong to? And I was like, oh, I like that. I'm going to riff on you, Menachem. So that notion of seeking something, that we're not here with answers. I don't provide answers in the podcast, but we're here seeking something together, and it's an ongoing project, like you said. It's the same podcast that started at Sinai, that continued in the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Zohar, that continues through to today. But I couldn't exactly copy him, or else that would be plagiarism, and a good artist is someone who steals from many people, not just from one. So there's a poem. It's attributed to a character in the 16th century in Sfat, which is recited by practicing Jews every Friday night, Ana B'Koach, in Aramaic. It's a very beautiful, enigmatic poem. Ana B'Koach, Gedulat Yimincha Tatetzor Kabel Enatam. So one of the phrases in there is Na Gibol Doshei Chudcha Kevavat Shamwem, O Mighty One, referring to God. Doshei Chudcha, those that seek your unity, protect them like the apple of your eye, or the pupil of your eye. And so that phrase had always stuck with me, that who are these people that we are praying for every week? Who are the Dorshei Yichudcha? And to me, the Dorshei Yichudcha are the mystics of every tradition, who are trying to seek out the unity of being, who have intimations of a state of being which is beyond time and beyond separation and beyond otherness, that's soaked and permeated by love and by the presence of the sacred and by compassion and bliss. And it's a state of unity where otherness falls apart, where us and them, where me and you, where here and now all seems to be a joke in the grand cosmic scheme, which melts into this oneness. And this to me is like the classic vision of the mystic. So I would say the seekers of unity are the mystics, first and foremost, and that isn't just a historical category. There was a Christian theologian, I think it was Rayner, who said that the Christian of the future will either be a mystic or no Christian at all. And I think that could be extended to religion in general, that the person of religion of the future will either be a mystic or not a religionist at all. So I think that the seekers of unity is really anyone who's looking to find intimacy and closeness with themselves, with each other, with the world around them, with nature, and with the divine, the sacred, whatever that means. That's who I think the seekers of unity are, both historically and today.
So what exactly is unity? I mean, because when I watched your episodes, it's mainly pointing out differences, and okay, we can. Are we seeking a shared vision that everybody has, or are we looking at the differences between them? And like we have the Jordan Peterson. Okay, we can aggregate all of the religions and poetry and wisdom throughout the world and show how it's all seeking one particular aim, and they just have their different paths on doing as such. Like when I think of unity, I hear, okay, you have your achdus, right? We need achdus, we need togetherness, and then you have the unity of tyranny, and then you have the unity of and then there's sameness, which people conflate with unity.
Yes.
And just if I gave you enough to riff on.
So, I really appreciate that question. That's a great question. I think that there's a mistake that we make. We think that unity means the obliteration of distinction or diversity. And that's where we get something like sameness. Hegel, the German philosopher, calls it the dark night in which all cows are black. So no matter what color the cow actually is, when it's dark, they all just look black. And it's just like one big casserole, one big cholent, where everything has just lost any semblance. And that's not the type of unity that I'm looking for. For marketing purposes, I had to make the channel name something short and concise. But if I could really stretch it out, it would be seeking unity in diversity, where there's a point where difference, and this is going to get maybe a little heady for a second.
You're going to like Derrida and
I was going to Derrida this a little. There's a point where and I'll try to make sense of it, because sometimes it's not made sense of much. There's a point where difference and identity, which are seen as opposites, are not actually opposites. How that works is that, and this is a notion which goes back to the core logic of mysticism, probably most finely articulated by Nicholas of Cusa in the 12th, 13th century. He came up with this phrase in Latin as coincidente oppositorum, which is the coincidence of opposites, the place where opposites meet. We have this idea in Judaism of
coincidence as opposed to coincidence, right?
Yes, correct. Okay. Yeah. We have the idea in Judaism of the nois ha'afachim, or the nimna hanimnois, of this sense where there's A and B, right? And they're stuck in a paradigm of oppositionality, where it's either one or the other, right? This is like a classic Aristotelian logic. It's either true or false. It's either this one or that one. It can't be both. But then there is what's known in Jewish thought as the third, which encompasses both of them. There's a third which is categorically other than them. And we see this which brings them into reconciliation, although from one plane of existence they don't seem reconcilable. We find this practice in Jewish hermeneutics and Jewish literary interpretation, where if we have two verses, anyone who daven Shachar in the morning recognizes from the 13 principles of Rabbi Yishmael, 13 hermeneutical principles, that if there are two verses that seem to contradict one another, there's going to be a third verse which is going to be machriya beineim, which will solve the two of them together. The way it works is that we generally see things on a single plane of existence. There's a really great book from this fellow by the name of Abbott called Flatland, where he talks about what would it be like to live on a two-dimensional plane, and into that two-dimensional plane would appear a three-dimensional object. How would that appear to the two-dimensional beings, right?
It's inconceivable.
It's so what would actually happen is he has a sphere that comes into the realm, and the sphere at the very bottom appears just as like one point in the line, and then as the sphere comes further into that plane, it becomes the line becomes expanded because you're seeing more of the sphere, and then as it goes through, it becomes smaller again. It's a very, very interesting like mental trip based on some really wild mathematics and geometry. But the basic point is that there's a plane of existence upon which we live, which is two-dimensional, where things seem to be fundamentally oppositional. We cannot both be here and not here at the same time. We cannot both be God and not God at the same time. Whatever axiom we're going to be putting forward. This may be a bit of a complex answer too, but I hope it's okay. But there's a higher plane of existence, and higher is the wrong word because higher is buying itself in. Higher is purchasing into an oppositional duality again. But there's a place where place doesn't exist, where high doesn't exist, where opposition doesn't exist, and in that space, that which is different and that which is identical are not distinct from one another. And it's in the differences that we can find identity, and it's in our identity where we find difference.
It's in our differences that we can find identity, and it's in our identity that we can find difference. Okay, I'll
bring that down in practical terms, in psychological terms. Me and you, we're two different people, yet we have a lot in common, and it's in our differences where we can find identity, right? So if you have a certain passion for a certain type of music, and I like a different type of music, so there's a difference there. But we can begin to see in what ways we might have some sort of shared perceptions based on what we appreciate as different, as distinct. Because if everything that you had, I had, then we would not be two people, we would just be a clone of the same person, and you would learn nothing about yourself or me. Mm-hmm. It's when we're able to disambiguate and differentiate between ourselves where we can come to some sort of understanding. The reason why conversation is interesting is because your experiences are not my experiences, and the things you know are not what I know, and we come to experience each other and learn from each other. And that's a difference which brings us into conversation and into relationship with one another. And then in our identity, there's lots of things that we share. We're both male. That's a big bug. we both don't want to get bitten by big bugs. And these things bring us, these things that are identical between us are able to show where there is a possibility for us to be different as well, and to have differentiations in those. I don't know if I'm articulating this particularly well.
Because I'm just so I can butt in. It's so why not? What's the difference between someone who's seeking difference and somebody who is seeking unity? Like, because there's a tremendous amount of value, which is an area where I'm so weak, right? Like, you look at different like the same words could be referring to different things depending on which context. So, like the Rambam, the intellect versus the intellect in chapter 3 versus chapter 1, right? It's he's using the same word, right? But he's referring to, it's a different resolution or a different level of analysis or whatever it is. So if we maybe hone in on the Rambam, like we can see that his influence from the fake Aristotle and the two gods of Moses, right? Like versus like, is there a shared, like I fundamentally believe the Rambam in all of his works is somehow integral, and he's hyperlinking and self-referencing and creating paradox, and maybe that's the biggest representative piece of evidence that the Rambam was a mystic is the fact that he introduces so much paradox for you to existentially be in turmoil and angst for the rest of your being. But he seeks making distinctions and discriminating and discerning. He's a very discriminatory and discerning individual, in his pursuit of unity, right? Because he says, what's the ultimate aim is knowing Dea Mitis, or knowing God, whatever translation we have of it. So he's simultaneously seeking unity, but by making distinctions and and codifying and measuring, which is all, like, for me, those are like, he did essentially unify all of Torah Shabbat Peh and say you can read it in my book with one opinion and say that you've learned all of Torah. Yeah. So I don't know, like, I'm scared of this seeking of unity, but I'm a seeker of synthesis. Would maybe the way I would put it for myself. Like, how do these work with each other? How do I use Greek language, philosophy, psychology, Hasidus? Like, how do I?
I want to try to jump in there with an idea. And there's so many different angles to approach this with, which makes it an interesting challenge, which is part of the beauty of conversation. There's this notion of the unity of God, right? So classic Jewish literature and then picked up by the Kabbalists speak about how before anything existed, there was just God and God's pure unity. Again, in Jewish liturgy, we have the Adon Olam prayer, which says that Adon Olam Hashem Alach B'Terem Kol Yetzer Nivra. God existed before anything else existed. God was there in God's unity. V'achari kechlot hakol, and once everything is done, and once the whole universe evaporates into some sort of the final death of the last sun of all the galaxies, v'achari kechlot hakol levado yimlach nara. God again will exist alone in God's unity. So the question then that the mystics ask is, if the purpose of existence is to come to this unity of God, then why did God see the need to manifest the cosmos at all? God had God's unity, and that unity was achieved. Why go through this whole?
It wasn't achieved. It just is. It
just is. Right.
It will be. Like
that's right. Oh, was, is, and will be. Right. Yeah. So why go through this whole process? And the Kabbalists read it as a very painful process. God has to contract God's self in this act of tzimtzum, and there's a cataclysm. There's this shattering of the shvira that happens. So why go through the whole thing? And the Kabbalists and later the Hasidic masters answer something very beautiful, that and it's probably borders on heresy, if not outright heresy, but the Kabbalists don't mind that, it seems.
They can get away with it.
They say that God's unity before the existence of anything else, and even to say before is a nonsensical term in that context, right? Because that moment is still here, it always is a unity which has no multiplicity, and in that it's lacking something. The unity which is achievable through the creation of the world is a diverse unity. To say that God is lacking something and is itself a high heresy, but the image that they use to describe it is that when God leads the Jewish people out of Egypt, according to the biblical narrative, there are 600,000 people that leave, and those represent the 600,000 archetypal souls, or sort of the base souls of all the people of Israel. And what happens in that moment is there's like this full manifestation of the face of God in the collective, in the people, which is not achievable without the people, which is why in Jewish law, if you see 600,000 Jews gathered together, you make a blessing. There are certain rare blessings we make in Judaism. Mm-hmm. There's a blessing that we make on the sun. I think it's every 17 or I think it's every 17 years we did it. We did it a few years ago. Berach Sachama. So there's a blessing that you make when you see 600,000 people. And the blessing is Chacham Harazim, the one who knows the secrets. And the secret basically is how God, which is one consciousness, can manifest in 600,000 individuals with no two sharing the same face. And yet all of those faces come together to make the face of God. And when they come to Sinai and they're there as one person with that face reunited, that entire partsuf of the people, that is when revelation takes place. And that in some sense is revelation. So this balance between this pure unadulterated unity, where there's entire sameness and there's no differentiation, that God had already in some sense, but it wasn't interesting. It was lacking something, and what it was lacking was diversity. What it was lacking was was me and you, and our idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, my 12-year-old Mendel pipes up and he's like, okay, but there was no concept of diversity before you created diversity. There was no the answer is like, why did God have to create a world like this? Is because in order for us to have real pleasure and godlike pleasure, a real hana, a real tainug, whatever word we're going to put on it, you need to, right? Like, you need to work for it, right? You need to create it. I'm like, well, you created the laws of nature that we have to work that way and that it has to function that way. Create it that we could have the ultimate pleasure without any of this.
No, so it's very clear that the answer that the Kabbalists are giving are not, they're not a priori. They're not speaking from God's position forward. They're speaking from our position backwards. They're saying, what do we have now, and what was necessary in doing this? And what is the deepest of our experiences where we can encounter godliness, and how may we see that as being the purpose of creation? And I think that there's something quite beautiful in that way of looking backwards. It may not be philosophically rigorous in the sense that this makes sense from God's perspective forward, but if we look backwards, the sense of where do we encounter the greatest divinity within ourselves? Is it when we are lost and we have no individuality, or is it when we're most capable of fully being ourselves and manifesting the divinity that is Mendel, the divinity that is Zevi? And in that deepest self-expression, there's a beautiful, beautiful Hasidic idea. I think it's from the Piasetzner. He writes that we speak about Moses, the giver of the Torah, as the Bible calls him the most humble man who ever walked the face of the earth. And later Jewish literature refers to him as this channel that just godliness poured through his throat, the Shekhinah spoke through his mouth. And the Piasetzner, I believe it was, writes that God did not speak through Moses as if Moses was some sort of vacant, empty vessel because he was so wiped clean of himself and therefore God could just pour through, which is generally how we conceptualize it. He says instead that Moses was so fully himself, so fully manifesting what it was to be Moses, that he was manifesting God through as Moses, through the cosmos expressing as himself. And I think that in that perspective there's a real beauty. There's a medrash which asks, why did God, there's a verse in Genesis which says that God consulted before creating Adam. God says, Naseh Adam b'talmenu, let us make man in our image, mankind in our image. And the rabbis try to give all kinds of explanations of who is God talking to? Is it some sort of pantheon? Like, is it Zeus and Jupiter that God is saying, let us create mankind in our image? So one answer is God is consulting with the angels, which we see God doing in the book of Job, and other, God is consulting with heaven and earth, because that's where Adam comes from. Very beautiful answers. But one answer which the Zohar picks up on is that God is consulting with the souls of the righteous. That there's these sort of eternal souls of the righteous which exist before Adam, which God speaks to. And then the Zohar follows up with that answer by saying, if God already had the souls of the righteous, then why create the world at all? You have the righteous here with you, just hang out with the righteous. So, the Talmud says that that in the future, in the end of days, God will have this dance party with the righteous, with the souls of the righteous, which seems like sort of the goal of creation. So if you have your righteous,
the dance party with the righteous.
If you have, right, that's what.
What's the goal? A dance party, ultimately.
It's a silent dance party.
Yeah, with the headphones on, no one else can hear.
It's kind of each one listening to their own track.
Right. What is Nietzsche's line? Like, I think it's Nietzsche. Like, if you look at somebody,
and those that were seen dancing,
without the music, were
thought might have been those that couldn't hear the music.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the question then is, if God already has his righteous with him, then just get the DJ and you have your party. You don't need to do this whole and I mean, existence is terrible. The amount of suffering and pain and bloodshed and agony and boredom and loneliness and in addition to all the beautiful things. So why do it all? And the Zohar says, in order to take those souls of the righteous, the soul of the tzaddik, and convert them through the process of existence, of embodiment, convert them into balei tshuva, into people who have mastered the return to God. And in that, there's a sense where the tzaddik is he's a bit boring.
Yeah,
he's this perfect, like, goody two-shoes angel. He doesn't know what it means to sin and to return, to lose himself and to find himself again, or herself. But the Baal Tshuva, the one who's been there and done that, is there. That's interesting because their personality shines through. Why is Augustine's confession such captured the imagination for centuries and millennia? Because there's a person there who falls and stumbles and sins and then returns to God. And there's a sense of that being an introduction of diversity, and that being a denial of pure, unmitigated unity.
So you grew up Chabad, right?
Yeah.
And I imagine I think Chabad in Australia is a little different than it is in the States, right? You have your big heads there's not a big Mysticism presence in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Because Gutnick, I know, is rather...
There is... It depends on Sydney, Melbourne. They have a bit of different demographics. But I would say Chabad of Australia is a bit more chilled out, particularly Sydney, because we're near the beach.
Right, yeah, you have to be. And are your parents Baal Tshuva?
No.
No, okay. So my parents are Baal Tshuva. And like from the young age, is like that, like I would, my dad would sit and teach me Tanya at 13 years old, and I'm like, I want to feel what you feel when you read this book, but I sure as hell don't feel it.
Yeah.
And there was this, and then the archetype of the Baal Tshuva of having lived a life and then chosen between other and to make a choice as opposed to it just being what I received.
Yeah. From
really young, I was like you had this opportunity, Mommy and Tati, like you had this opportunity to choose and to become this as opposed to just being handed to you. And like it was like, but there's this language of like, okay, like, right, it's all good, it's everything is good, God is good, the world is good, we know it, now here it is, believe it, live like this. And it's almost like as a, like almost from like the Nietzschean side of me, like I don't wish an easy life on anybody close to me, right? Like I would, like, because there's, like, I want the Baal Tshuva, I want the struggle, I want to fall, like give me this opportunity. So I was like, why would you ever want your kid to be from birth? And this, but there's this, when I growing up Chabad and with the Hasidic world, like this almost like shame at looking at the darkness and looking at, and it's just all about the light, it's all about the light, it's all, but we keep talking about bring light into darkness, and as these, like, but we forget that there's the darkness there, and like there's something, the reason we're bringing light into the darkness is because there's something interesting in the darkness, and there's something interesting there. But I get this, my allergic reaction to mysticism or Kabbalah is it's just everything and anything goes. It's not rigorous. It doesn't allow for there to be rules of discernment and distinction, at least on the low level that I've been introduced to. Like, as my life has progressed, I've met people who are like, okay, they're Kabbalists or mystics or whatever you want to call them, but they're also deeply rational and capable of utilizing the language of rationality and psychology in order to give over their mystic unity, sameness, oneness, shleimus, like viewpoint of the world. And I still, like, when I go to Tzfat, I love it, but I'm also like I just feel like it's a bunch of suckers. Like there's a certain, like, it's mysticism, it's powerful, it's moving, it clearly is it's speaking a language that even if I clearly don't understand it, it's saying something to me. But it's also just the amount of people I see who are using Kabbalah and mysticism as a tool to, and from my outside perspective, to manipulate people into following them. And it's like I resonate with the Ramble. I'm like, you're better, like, oh, it's all bullshit. Like, as opposed to, like, we're better off thinking it's all bullshit and let's just neglect it. And I don't know, like, how do we, like, you seem to be doing a good job, but how do we be both rigorous and mystics? And
so I think it's definitely possible, and I think it's really important to do it. I mean, who was it? George Carlin, who said that whatever someone is doing in their life, they think it's the most important thing that is to be done in that moment in time. And I think that we have to believe that. We have to believe that what it is that we're doing is the most important thing, at least for us, and to know that it's from our perspective. But I really do think that finding a rigorous and thoughtful and rational and empirical grounding for mysticism may be the most important thing to do in this moment, and I think that it's something which has been happening for the past few decades, and it's converging now. And I think it's really imperative that it converges at this moment. And there are, for every person who's trying to do it rationally and thoughtfully and sensibly and responsibly, there are a dozen charlatans, which is all the more reason to up our efforts and trying to do it seriously and responsibly. I think we need to roll things back and sort of play a thought experiment, which is one of the tools of philosophy. And the reason that I do this is because I think that we need to approach this cluster called mysticism from a few different angles, because people think differently. We need to approach it historically, psychologically, scientifically, philosophically, And sort of each one has, I'll try to give the ground roots for each one, and then each person based on their own predilection. Some people are more scientifically and empirically oriented, and there's the science to pursue in that direction. And then there are some people who are more philosophically oriented, and there's etc. So maybe because science has become simply the dominant cultural narrative of truth, we'll start with the scientific, but I'm happy to move on to the other ones as well. There's a few ways to approach the intersection between science and mysticism, and many of them have been done bad, and where the charlatans prosper is mostly in this space of trying to sell whatever quack science as sort of confirming mysticism.
Where they call themselves doctor, but they're really a chiropractor.
Yeah, there's no lack of those. So let's try and be, and I'm not a scientist, so let's try to be very humble and careful in doing this. Firstly, in terms of what's most immediate and empirical is our own experience, right? Now, the fact that people self-report what's referred to as a mystical experience is something which has been documented throughout history and continues to happen today, and is not hard for us to trigger today. It can be done through meditation, through silence. It can be done through music, love, or it can be done in a laboratory with psilocybin. Mm-hmm. Studies, psilocybin, psychedelics, acid, LSD were all classed as grade A drugs for many decades, but they're now back in studies. And the studies that are coming out of the top labs in the medical scientific world today, Johns Hopkins and others, are showing with empirical research that people who have a psychedelic experience, right, rate that experience as I think it's one of the top 5 most meaningful experiences in their life, along with the birth of a child, marriage, the death of a loved one, like really monumental experiences. And that these are transformational experiences and show incredible aptitude for helping people deal with depression, with anxiety, with suicidal ideation, with deep addictions that doctors had given up on pretty much. And I'm not saying this is some sort of miracle drug and everyone should be doing psychedelics. I'm going to contextualize this in a philosophical way in just a second. But the fact that people are having mystical experiences and is verifiable empirically, right? Before extrapolating to anything metaphysical, let's just talk about what's happening in a scientific human realm. We're doing scans on people who are having mystical experiences, so we know we can begin to map the neural activity, what's happening in the brain in those moments, and begin to make correlations between what we understand from other neurological activity. And what's most important, I think, in those studies by Roland Griffins and by Richard, what's the other fellow's name? Slips my mind at the moment. He put out a book recently called Sacred Knowledge, where he shares a lot of this research, which is really great. If his name comes back to me, I will say it. That within the psychedelic experience, what they've identified based on the parameters set out by William James, the father of American psychology and pragmatism, what is actually carrying the weight, the active ingredient in that experience, is the mystical experience. And there's a few parameters of what that's being determined. That's a sense of unity and bliss and timelessness, and a sense of dissolution of boundaries, a sense of lust of self and ego. These are like the common features from a psychological perspective of what's happening in the mystical experience, which means that the psychedelic is only one avenue to get there. But if one has a mystical experience triggered by any of the 1,000 ways of getting there, then the potential for deep transformation and healing and becoming at peace with oneself, a lot of people with terminal cancer facing their fear of death, is precipitated by this mystical experience. So there's something empirical happening here, something which we can observe and study scientifically, which we are. And I think we're only beginning to just do that. The question then is, what the hell is happening, right? How do we give a pill to someone, or how do we precipitate an experience with a few days of meditation that is causing lifelong transformation, that is causing an experience which is entirely allowing people to reframe their perspective of self? And I think it's there that we need to turn to the philosophy, and we need to ask, what are the narratives that are shaping our everyday ordinary reality that are keeping us locked in our patterns of self-abuse, of addiction, of depression, of nihilism. And what is a reformulation, a retelling of our understanding of reality that may shift that perspective entirely, that when fully internalized, and whether that's done philosophically or experientially, that reformalizing our conception of self and reality has the ability to affect these changes that we're seeing being done empirically. And the reason I'm phrasing it that way is because this is what happens historically, to move from science to history a little. We live in a very Christian world today, at least here in the West. Before Christianity existed, right? For the same amount of time that Christianity has existed today, so for 2,000 years, there were the Greco-Roman mystery religions, which is a sort of a catch-all term to include the mysteries of Ulysses and Dionysus, and those are the two big ones, but a whole bunch of other ones. And what would happen is once a year, people would go on a pilgrimage, which is part of a transformative process, and we see the same theme being repeated in Islam, in the Hajj, in Judaism, in the ascent by foot to Jerusalem 3 times a year. They would go on a pilgrimage. There's all kinds of speculation about exactly what happens on that. A very good video was just put out by my friend and colleague Philo on his channel Let's Talk Religion, where we don't exactly know what happened because they weren't allowed to repeat what happened, and if they did, they would be killed for it. So there was this sort of veil of secrecy that was intentional there. But in that experience, they somehow were moved from darkness to light. And in the descriptions, in the very scant descriptions, that the fragments that we have, and one of the things that we know is that their fear of death was shed, and they participated somehow in immortality. They were able to experience a theophany, a revelation of the gods, and somehow participate or become united with the God that they experienced. And the reason that I bring this up is because the people that went through that experience, which really was everyone who was anyone in ancient Greece, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, everyone did it, they were known as the initiates, the mystikoi, which is where we get the English word mysticism from. So the same thing, and there may have been psychedelics involved, and there may be music involved. It's not
They've
entirely
done like
clear.
Archaeological research on the kalim that they used, vessels with having DMT and other stuff in there.
There's a bunch of interesting research, which I think is still inconclusive exactly what's going on, and I think it's not just one. I think there's a reductionism where it's like, oh yes, the whole history of spirituality is all reducible to psilocybin. And I think that's childish. But
the acacia tree.
But certainly it plays a large part in history. But I think what's important here is that there is a practice that's been done through human culture of precipitating a radical change of consciousness, a change of conception of self, and that experience, which radically alters us, which is nothing like our ordinary experience of duality and separation, right? And the anxiety and guilt and fear that comes with that, and that it's that experience that gets encoded into religion, and it's that experience which is the pursuit of the divine, the pursuit of the divine unity. And so I think that there is a psychological place to begin. There's a neurological place to begin. There's a chemical place to begin. There's a historical way of doing this, and then there's the philosophical. And basically, what's happening philosophically is two arguments essentially: an argument against the conception of selfhood that we ordinarily carry, and we see this being done from people as diverse as the Buddha, who argues for anatman, for the non-existence of self, that the self is not some sort of solid, tight object that makes decisions, and that's a very painful notion which brings a lot of suffering, dukkha, in the Buddha's language. And as far as people like David Hume, who argue that the self is just simply a bundle of sensations, that there is nothing that we can put the finger on the self. And the Kabbalists will argue that the true self is the yichida, is the soul, which is just part of this larger consciousness. And you see this argument being made today by the panpsychists. So that's one, sort of a deconstruction of self that's happening philosophically, and I think there's good philosophical reason to argue for that. And you see that being played out today between people like Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris, and that's a live debate today. David Chalmers, for example. And then there's the metaphysical debate. So what is the fundamental nature of reality? Do we live in a reality which is fundamentally made up of bits and objects and parts that have no real interaction with one another? They're just sort of billiard balls banging up against each other, which means that we live in a world which is fundamentally separate and alienated from each other, and we can experience that psychologically. Or do we live in a world where things are somehow deeply interwoven and interconnected and interdependent to the way that where they may be fundamentally one thing at the bottom of them? And that's a position in philosophy known as monism, and that's been argued by people like Spinoza, by people like Plotinus, by people like Nagarjuna in a bit more of a negative formulation that the world is not dual, and up until modern contemporary philosophers, people like Alfred North Whitehead, who argued against a conception of reality as separate objects, but rather as a deep, interpenetrated relational world where the base matter of reality is not objects, but is relationships and is processes. So I think that there are many ways of approaching mysticism. And this is only like the scratching the surface. There's a lot more in all of those fields, in the mathematics, in the psychology, in the philosophy. This is really just a Rashi Prakim as it would be. And I think that investigating the confluence, the intersection, the synergy, the synthesis between the science, the mythology, the theology, the philosophy, the metaphysics, the ethics, on these issues, I think is really integral because we seem to be living in a world that's falling apart every day. I mean, if you spend a minute on Twitter, like, it doesn't seem like there's much hope for humanity, the crises that we face, and it seems like we really need to get our act together. And it seems like the sense, a new narrative that can change people's perspectives of themselves and of reality is what's needed today. And it's needed. We need the poets, we need the philosophers, we need the scientists, we need the rabbis, we need the imams, the priests, we need the dancers, we need the musicians to begin or to continue to tell the story in a way that can move us into a state of reality, which ultimately will move us to a state which is not torn apart and seems like we're on the edge of falling into an abyss of chaos.
Unless it's magical, it seems like the only way, you're looking for a shared narrative that we're all participating in as humans. Like, is this the New World Order? Is this like the Economic World Forum? Like, there's you see the people who seem to be actively pursuing it, and especially the ones with influence and competence and money and power. Like, the skepticism that I think we all feel is founded. And then you said somehow, where you said the bracha we say on 600,000 Jews. And there's something about this in the diversity coming together as a whole. I'm trying to figure out my question. Like, it's we have, like, it seems like, okay, I'm gonna rewind a little bit. Like, maybe ask a different question. Why does what does it mean that Judaism is true? Like, and why, like, and we're correct?
Yeah.
Like, and if we look at, like, okay, so it's not the specific ideas that necessarily we're coming up with. It almost seems like the way the Ramble put it, it's our mechanism, our process of our path of truth. It's not the truth that we're looking for. It's a derech ha'emes. It's a derech eitz chaim. It's a derech hayashar. It's and similarly, what's a derech? It's like whether it's science, right, which has its rules and means of testing and verifying and veracity, or checks and balances and peer review, like all of these mechanisms that seem to allow us to discern what's corrupt, what's not corrupt, because it almost seems to be that's always a problem. If we're just seeking unity, every guy who's done psychedelics, everybody who's run an ashram, everybody and everybody who's a pope and a Catholic and a Buddhist, it's all truth, it's all MS, it's all one. Let's just accept everybody and all paths are equal. And it seems to me like what Judaism offers is a Torah Shabbat Peh, which is something that's always evolving and living and breathing, which actively discriminates and accepts, and sometimes discriminates things that shouldn't have been discriminated against, maybe arguably like the Rambam, or accepts things like Shabtai Tzvi, which were detrimental. If we're going to attach ourselves to any particular vision of truth or any particular person's conception of MS, like, that's where we fall. And it's the only way to protect ourselves is to create systems of, like, listening, testing, and questioning, like, all the time. And it's obviously we're treading in waters that are deeper than we could possibly imagine.
That's where we like to be.
It's the only place to be. There's it's just like a riff on that. Have you listened to any of Joey Rosenfeld's lecture series at all?
Yeah. So
like that right, where he had a series on the first Mishnah and Brachos. into the darkness, I think is what he titled it, which is what Torah Shabbat Peh is, and it's how, in like the analogy of darkness, it's in the darkness that all like the important things are to be found, right? Like that's why we just need tools, essentially, which is a light, a torch to go into the darkness with. We don't want to go in by ourselves. Maybe an advisor or a flashlight, whatever our conceptual tool is. We're looking into the darkness, and what he said Torah Shabbat Peh is right, like the first mission in Brachos is on when you're allowed to say Kriya Shema, like, and it's between this hour of night and this hour of night. And when are you able to announce the oneness of God during the dark era? And that's, and like Torah Shabbat Peh is our mechanism, that of lighting up the darkness.
I think there is a mechanism at play. I think there is a mechanism. But there was a few things that you brought up there. The first was like that it may sound a bit nefarious, like some sort of new world order, some sort of global narrative. I don't think it's nefarious. I think it's the message of Judaism through the ages. I think when the prophet Jeremiah in chapter 31 says that there will come a day where no person shall need to teach their brother, know the Lord, for they shall all know me. And then the prophet Hosea says that a day is coming where the knowledge of God will cover the face of the earth like the waters cover the sea, which is how Maimonides ends his Mishnah Torah famously.
And that's the end of existence. That's our aim. That's our.
So the way I understand that means, what does it mean that no one needs to teach about God because they'll all know me? What that means, as far as I understand, what God means for the prophets and for Maimonides and for the mystics, is the unity of being. And when it's so obvious that we live in a world which is one whole organism, which every single thing that happens affects one another, and that is the divine expression in the manifest unity that we live in, then you don't need to teach someone, because it's like the fish in water, right? That they all know they're surrounded by water. So I don't think it's nefarious at all. I think it is the vision of Judaism. I think it's the vision of Judaism from Jeremiah through the Rambam into the Hasidic masters, and that's what they're striving for. And I don't think that they're doing that alone. If we were doing that alone, that would be terribly lonely, and I don't know how far we would get. But we're doing it alongside what I see as our brothers and sisters in every tradition around the world, in the finest representations of it, in the Sufis, in the Christian mystics, in the Buddhists, in the Hindus, in the Taoists, in the Native American traditions, all calling for that new song, for the unity of existence. And I don't think it's, I'm not so in touch with vogue politics and economics, but if there's people that are preaching for oppression and for further segregation and for economic disadvantagement, and then clearly that's not the song. The prophet is calling for justice, and is calling for krasim dror ba'aretz, that the prophets say that righteousness will flow like rivers, right? This is the day that we aspire to.
Well, that's the age we live in now, where everybody's righteous and a social justice warrior.
Well, righteousness doesn't mean righteousness in that I'm better than you. I'm self-righteous. It means that I'm righteous in the way that God is righteous, that I'm kind, that I'm humble, that I'm just. That's what Ramble writes in the last parak of Mishnah Torah, quoting Yirmiyahu, that the prophet Jeremiah again, that the pinnacle of mankind is, and this is a spoiler to anyone who's in the middle of watching the series, the pinnacle of mankind is to know God, for ki ani Hashem oiseh chesed mishpat u'tzedakah ba'aretz nu'um Hashem bezois chafatzti nu'um Hashem, says God, that God desires in chesed, in loving kindness, in tzedek, in justice, and in tzedakah, in righteousness and charity, and that's the righteousness.
Yeah, but you threw everything in there, because chesed and mishpat seem to be at odds on one level of analysis.
I didn't throw everything in there. Jeremiah
threw everything.
And the reason why Jeremiah throws that all in there is because that those are the attributes of God, and that is the God which we are taught to aspire and to imitate. It's a God who visits the sick, who buries the dead, and who clothes the naked, and
destroys the wicked.
Yes, but true justice and true kindness aren't mutually exclusive. the Kabbalists refer to the two poles as chesed and gvura, but they meet together in tiferet. They meet in what's translated as beauty, because beauty is when we have a harmony of the two. And in God, those opposites, as we were speaking, can be reconciled. And true mercy and true justice are not two different things. Maybe I'll share a tidbit on that, and you can decide whether you want to keep it or not. And then we'll talk to the question of what's the mechanism of how do we determine truth, in terms of reconciling those two sides of things. During the Great Depression, this is my go-to parable, my go-to mashal for Tiferet, and I think it brings out this point quite nicely. During the Great Depression, there was people were starving. It was a terrible time, and there was a woman who was caught shoplifting. She stole bread from the local bakery. And she was brought in. She was apprehended by the owner, and police were called, and she was brought into court. And the judge has in front of him the baker and the woman, and he asked the woman, "Why did you steal bread?" He says, "I have two starving children at home. If I don't feed them, they'll die." And it's a pretty good reason to steal bread, right? But then if he lets it go, then we've created an anarchy, and the baker won't be able to feed his kids at the end of the day if everyone's just stealing bread from him. We'll have lawlessness and chaos. So what do you do? So Chesed says you let the woman walk. She's feeding her starving children. Of course. What kind of question is that? Gvura says so compassion says that, and Gvura, justice, says no. There's law and order. Like, you can't just let people steal. What the judge does is the judge finds in a moment of, and it takes genius to do this. He finds the balance between the two. He finds the true tzedek, the true justice, which is there were a bunch of people in the courtroom that were sort of spectators in the court case, and the woman had stolen, let's say, the equivalent of like $3 of bread. He fined everyone in the room 20 cents. He fined them for living in a city where a single mother has to steal to feed her children. How do you live in such a city? How do you not take care of your neighbor? He fined them all, and with that money he paid the baker. And there was restitution. That's called Tiferes. That's where in moments of genius we can see how we can transcend the dichotomy. Maybe a cuter version of this. I came across this recently. There's a grandfather who walks into his daughter's home, and to visit his grandchild and daughter, and the grandchild is in this like little playpen cage, and he's crying. He wants to leave, and the grandfather goes to take the child out, and the mother. The mother of the child, the daughter of the grandfather, says, no, he was misbehaving. He's in naughty time. He's not allowed to leave the cage. And the grandfather, it's not his child. He has to respect his daughter's parenting and autonomy. But it's his grandchild crying. What is he, a heartless monster? He's going to let his grandchild cry, but he can't take the child out. What does he do? What he does is he climbs into the cage and he sits and he plays with the child inside. So he's able to both, have compassion for the child and also have justice and respect the mothers. So there are ways of finding in moments of genius of finding that balance, and that's often what we're called to do in life. In terms of what mechanisms we have, what are the mechanisms for ascertaining the truth here? Like, what is the equivalent of the scientific method or peer review in scholarship? And how do we know that like not every guru and every person selling snake oil is someone to listen to? I think that we have to know what our axioms are, right? What are the things that we're striving for, which we will not compromise on? And we see that Abraham has his axiom. Abraham's axiom is the unity of God, which is why, when as a child, he's living. His father, by profession, according to the Midrash, is an idol maker, and Abraham has an axiom that he discovered through, according to the Midrash and according to Maimonides, through his own rational inquiry, right? Not through revelation. God only speaks to him after he comes to acknowledge the truth of God through his own speculation, through his own scientific or philosophical process. And he comes to the axiom that God is one and there is only God and there's nothing but God, and therefore the idols in his father's store are lies, and he's swindling people from their hard-earned money, promising them with salvation and restitution which they cannot have. And what he does is he takes his hammer and he smashes those lies. He breaks them in the face of his axiom. What is our axiom in the face of which we will smash the idols that we hold and the idols of our day and age and every day that we're in? And I think that our axiom, at least for myself, and I think for anyone that's steeped in Judaism and in particularly from the perspective of the mystics or in any mystical tradition, the axiom is that there's only one thing that exists, and that is God, and that God is united, and therefore everything is one in God's unity. And you can call it God, you can call it something else, doesn't really matter. And once we have that axiom, and we know that axiom leads to certain testable outcomes, right? They're predictors of that axiom. The axiom is, if you really believe that and embody that, you'll act with kindness because you're treating everything as if it's one with you, as if it's God. You'll act with compassion. You'll have equanimity. You'll be able to hold balance and be present with people. These are the fruits of that position, and this is something that William James speaks about in his brilliant book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. What are the ethical outcomes? What are the psychological outcomes? Buddha writes that when I began to meditate, I didn't gain anything, but I lost things. I lost guilt, I lost anxiety, I lost fear, I lost jealousy. These are the actionable outcomes of our metaphysical axioms. When we have those axioms, that doesn't allow for idolatry. Idolatry means philosophically, means economically, means socially, means interpersonally. When we have our axiom, then we can see anything that's being presented. Here, you have a foreign system. What claim is it making about the nature of reality? Is it claiming that nature is fundamentally one and united, right, with the language of God or otherwise? And does that lead to kindness and to justice? Then that is part of truth. And the Talmud says very clearly, Kabbalah Sameness Misha Amrei, that whoever gives you the truth, it doesn't matter where it's coming from, it's the truth, right? And
Torah says it, or the Rambam says it?
No, it's before. I think it's maybe even a Mishnah. I think it's maybe even.
I always quoted the Rambam as Kibbulat Emes Mimashama.
It's a problem that we.
I was going to ask you, what do you think the Rambam meant by Kibbulat Emes Mimashama?
I think that's what he means, and I think that he does that thoroughly.
Can I throw in? That means also, whenever you make a statement like that, it says reject falsehood.
Yes,
from
absolutely.
Who says it has to be true as well.
Absolutely.
Which means we to me, I guess that's where it's. I guess maybe when I was like 20, I was more of like this, much more skeptical than when I was younger. I was really skeptical, and then I graduated. I was just skeptical. I wasn't offering and it was when I was like 12, 13, 14. Right? I was very skeptical. Right? I was asking questions that pissed way too many people off, and most people aren't capable of responding to me or saying I don't know.
Yeah.
And it was more like, okay, for my dad, I'd get oh, I hear your question. I've heard the question before, and here's the answer to the question.
Yeah.
No, you didn't hear my question.
Right.
There's a certain listening. But this, I thought, to me, it's I feel like our chesed isn't where we're lacking. It's in our ability to do din, to be discerning and discriminatory.
Yes.
That's where our skill set is lacking, because now, right, and that's what the world's suffering from now. I can't just trust anybody. My media sources I can't trust. My gurus I can't trust.
Yeah.
And now we're moving from, we don't want trust, we want verifiability, which is Bitcoin, and right, which allows for it to be verified, and I don't need trust. Why, if you could eliminate trust from a relationship by making it contractual, right? What's a marriage, right? To a certain degree, here's my written contractual responsibilities to you, my wife, and this is what I have to provide. We don't just leave things to trust. We create mechanisms of security and stability. But like you said, idol worship. There's it's to me what was Avram's biggest? What was the issue with avodah zarah, with idolatry? Is it fills in a blank that shouldn't have been filled, and you should have kept seeking, right? You should have kept seeking. You should keep seeking. And when, I don't know, and to throw in the Hanukkah story and darkness, and how it was the darkest of all the gullus, but it wasn't the one. It was when the Greeks there's the Medrash that says, Yavan is Tzion without the tzaddik, right? And tzaddik is Yosef at tzaddik, right? There's who embodied all these attributes of Yavan, right? Beauty and aestheticism, and he was the shore, right? The ox, and then what came out of Yosef ended up being the golden calf, right? You see all these negative consequences of this Yosef Tzaddik approach, which is I'm going to be in the world. Right? This is really this discussion that the world is having is the discussion between Yosef and his brothers, right? Am I going to be in the world and taking and incorporating its wisdom and its visions into the grander vision, or I have something that is extremely valuable and I'm going to do whatever I can to protect it at all costs and save it, right? That's the Yehuda approach, right? What was the defining attribute of Yehuda? It says kafel b'avodah zarah, right? His denial of avodah zarah, right? This rejection of avodah zarah, and right now avodah zarah, it seems like more accessible and more persuasive than it's ever been in history. Like, but at the same time, I don't trust anything anymore. So I'm not trusting the avodah zarah, and I'm not trusting the Torah, and I'm not trusting truth. So we're like, right now, it seems like this is the darkest point in history where there is no certainty. And for me, I love it because there's no reason for you to have had certainty ever, right? There's a certain lack of certainty and need to pursue and need to find, which I love that you're doing. It's anybody who says they know the truth and they have the answer. That's the person I'm afraid of. It's the people who like are just asking questions and better questions. And I think Nathan Cardozo, Rabbi Nathan, that's his name? Nathan Lopez Cardozo, or whatever his full name is. He has that book on, his most recent book he put out was like Rebellion and Religion or something along those lines. And he points out like that every answer is a form of a death, right? Like it ends the road. Yes. Our aim is better and better questions. Yes. Right? So what I see to me, the unity I'm seeking is I'm looking at all the languages of the world, so to speak, not just English or Hebrew or Chinese. I'm looking at the language of philosophy, of science, of culture, of history, and using those languages to refine and beautify that which I think I'm attached to, right? Because I always get stuck as like, oh, I'm a Jew, right? Like, and I believe that this is MS somehow, and I think I know it, and like I'm like, on the one hand, like I know I need to be open, because if I'm closed and dogmatic, that's like that's the antithesis of the mechanism of truth. Yeah. But then if you're open, you're subject to corruption, poisoning, and it's always like what role, like we all play different roles, each different face. There's the artist who's trying to find synthesis, there's the philosopher who's trying to discriminate, and then there's the politician who's creating division and it's like almost like I like the ones who are creating division and are cynical and skeptical, even though they're like the most toxic and they might stress me out the most. Like I'm just I don't even know where I started this line of thought right at this point, but yeah, I'm afraid of like I'm afraid of just accepting everything, but then I don't trust myself to be able to discriminate against what's real and what's not real. Because one thing I gained from psychedelics is, which is kind of like my introduction to existentialism and radical subjectivism, and I have a really awesome take on that I came up with. I think I came up with, maybe I probably didn't, I just stole it from a bunch of different sources and came up with something on, like, we're both like, here's objectivity, like the Rambam's like, here's objectivity, we're trying to like know the outside world around us, right? And like it's objectivity, and I don't care about your feelings and your subjectivity. That's like, to the degree of which your subjectivity is objective is to the degree of which you are interacting with God, right? Like, and that was like the biggest shift in my life, like that and then now I'm switched on this other end, like of Sartre and Nachman philosophy, like of just like, I have nothing other than my perspective, right? I can't have anything other than my perspective. And my conception of self, like, I can never be not selfish, but I can expand my conception of self. Like who do I include? What do I include in my ego boundaries, as opposed to the Buddhist, which is to get rid of the ego boundaries. And okay, fuck, I'm just lost at this point.
I hear a couple different themes there.
Okay, yeah, help me out.
There's this line from the great song that the Jews sang when they left, when they were crossing through the sea that split for them, when they left Egypt. Az Yashir, which is phrased in future tense, that then Moses will sing, which Chazal read as as prefiguring the resurrection when they will again sing this song. So it's a song which is relevant and ever relevant, right? We are, as many refer to it, as the generation of the desert, right? That's what many of the masters have called us, the generation of Moses. And over there, which means that there's lessons, unique lessons from that generation for us today. One of the things in that song is this great line. It's this biblical parallelism, is a technical term, where there's like this poetic form where the same thing is repeated in two different ways, which is Ze Eli van Veho Elihe Avivar Mimeno. And I apologize if you've heard this drush already, because it's a fairly used one.
Every time I hear it, I'll hear something different.
Good.
Right?
Which in English means, this is my God, and I will glorify him, and this is my God, and I will exalt him, basically. It's this form of biblical poetry. But because we don't read anything in the Bible at face value, and any extra syllable or consonant we scrutinize, so this is even a crown, exactly, even just a chupchik. There's a technical term for those things. They're called anyhow, whatever the technical term is. So what is this double phrase? What's going on here? So the interpreters read it as that there's two different gods here. And when I say two different gods, I mean two different relationships with God. Some people go confused by Maimonides' class, because they thought I meant that Maimonides actually had two different gods, two different conceptions or relationships to God. One is Ze'eli, this is my God, Van Veho. And the other one is, that's God A, and then God B is Elihe Avi Varimeno, the God of my father, and I will exalt him. The language there is in the masculine. And there's a very keen observation here, which I think may have some truth, like for us in this moment, and may, I think, respond to some of the themes that you're bringing up, which is that there's a God, there's a truth that we inherit from previous ages. These are the truisms, and they could be the religious. This is literally the God of our Father that we were taught as children. And that God we have to hold in high esteem. We cannot throw out all of the past and start afresh like Descartes did. If we did that in every generation, we'd be in a very dark place. We have to, but those gods are exalted. They're not here with us. They're our parents' God. They're somewhere those truths are somewhere in the past. And then there's a new truth that we have to discover in every generation, and that's Ze'eli. This is my God. This is my axiom. This is my truth. This is what I'm willing to die on the altar for. And that God is Anveho, which grammatically, according to this interpretation, is broken up of two Hebrew words of ani v'hu, I and thou, me and him. There's an intimate relationship there. It's present. It's in my life. It's my axiom, so I live with it when I wake up, and I live with it when I go to sleep, and I live with it when I eat, and when I sleep, and when I talk. That's my God. And it may not be as firm and as exalted and as lofty and as gloried as the God of my father. But I cannot live just on the God of my father. I cannot live on the truths of the past, and I can't just live on my own truths, right? Because both of those truths are there. The gods of the past are somehow dead to me, right? The death of God that Nietzsche pronounced. And then again, if all I have is my subjective truth, then today I'm identify as a chicken, and tomorrow I good is bad and bad is good, and there's nothing that keeps any semblance of reality. And I think that being in the darkness means that we're able to hold on to both of those truths and to both of those gods and both of those conceptions of reality. And there's the truth that we inherit, and that truth constantly needs to be reworked, and it constantly needs to be refined. And that's the truth that I come to. That's my God, with whom I'm intimate. There's this notion that which is really beautiful, that the Ark of the Covenant, which contained the truth of the people of Israel, the Torah, and it's from where God spoke through the cherubs to Moses, that no one could touch that. No one was allowed to touch the Ark. If you touched it, you died. No one was allowed even into the room, the Holies of Holies, where it was kept, besides for the high priest once a year for all of Israel. And if he went in, and if for a second he had the wrong contemplation, he would die. And yet, the Bible prescribes that truth embodied in the physical object of the Ark of the Covenant has to be on poles, that the badim, the poles of the iron, aren't allowed to be taken out, even when it sits for 250 years in one spot, because that truth always has to be able to move on a dime. If our truth is static, then it's cobs and it's dust and cobwebs. That paradox of the Ark of the Covenant, from where God speaks, where truth, the bastion of our truth, which is untouchable and immutable, it is solid gold, literally, has to be also able to be moving on a second. I think that's what's happening. The poles of the iron today is the capacity to open conversation about our deepest truths, to be podcasting, to be sharing, we're moving the truth forward, and we're making that into relationship of it's Ze Egli, this is now my God. And we don't abandon the sacrality. We don't open the curtain of the Kodesh Kodashim to let everyone gaze at the Ark of the Covenant. But we're never allowed to take those poles out. They can't for a moment be stagnated, or else the truth is dead. I think both of them have to be ever present.
And like, even if they there is no other way for like both the Eli, what's this? Eli van Veu, like there is, right, like when I say, for me, I think about that concept when I'm davening Shemona Esrei. It says Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, right? Like, okay, wasn't it the same God? Were there different gods? Right. So there is that degree, like the one that they were seeking to know, right? Like that's the God that I'm referring to. When the Rambam opens up the Mishnah Torah, he doesn't say God, he says the Matzai Rishon, right? Like primal existence, whatever we're going to call it. Like there is this shared objective reality that, as radically, inescapably subjective human beings, we are, like, I want a relationship with that God. So talk about the covenant, what was in there was the broken luchos, correct? Yes. And so my
both the broken and the full.
Right, broken and the full. And so it says, right, the broken ones, right, those were a bria chadasha, right? God created a stone that wasn't part of wasn't from the original Evan Shasiya, but for all intents and purposes is the Evan Shasiya. But because it's fundamentally the same, it's that which is created directly by God as opposed to being part of an evolutionary process. So he created it, and then he carved with his fingers, whatever that means, into the tablets. And one of the miracles, right, is that on both sides, you were able to, no matter which way you looked at it, it was still legible, right? Which would have been backwards. And so for me, what that was there was, I guess, almost like the world was fundamentally a different place, right? It says when we died, there was a Gilui Shechina at Mount Sinai, right? With in this presence, and so Moshe comes down, and right, he has this stone that no matter which way you look at it, like we see the same thing, and
it speaks the truth from all sides.
Yeah, from all sides, and the truth, the objective truth, is recognizable from all subjective perspectives. So then we have our Chet Ego, the golden calf, where we're dancing around our own projections, is the way I really, that's what caused them to drop it. When we were, not the fact that we had our own projections, we always will. Why are you getting upset at them, God, right? That's the dialogue. Then he comes down, he sees them dancing around it and worshiping it.
They deified there.
And, and then they dropped it. And then he dropped it, it shatters, he goes back up, and then what does the Torah say about the next, right? It was written on it that which had been written before, but it didn't have any of these miracles.
Right.
And so that's kind of the world we live in now, is where the original vessel the initial tablet was shattered. And now there's this, it's the same thing. It's the same object. There is still a stone, there is still an objective reality, but no matter which way we look at it, it's going to look different. Like that's what was introduced with subjectivity, and that's why the response to that is, instead of Pe'el Daberbo, right, which we had access to, we want you to speak Moshe, and then, okay, Torah Shabbat Pe'el was an outgrowth of us needing to have a means of communicating with God, but not directly. Correct. And that goes into Jerry Rosenfeld's series on like this. It's in the darkness. It's in that we're essentially the Kabbalists collecting the pieces. Yes. But there will become this world where those tablets are back. We will observe reality, and we'll see it in a shared way, like, because we all have God. I think of God, and you think of God, and we're both thinking of the same God, but no, we're not, right? There's overlap between my conception of God and purpose and how I see it and how I understand it and yours, but it's not the same. It can't be the same. I'm subjective, you're subjective. And to me, that was like the biggest gift Hashem ever gave us, was subjectivity. And Adam Arishon made that choice. There's just right and wrong here, right? The existence of right and wrong wasn't knowledge. What switches is the knowledge of tov and ra, which the way I understand is tov and ra are almost subjective metrics as opposed to right and wrong, which is like, okay, this is the world is. I see this is the way, or this is how I should act, right? There's a gilui shechina where I don't. Hashem shechina is mamal kol eretz kavodo, right? Like where, like it just is. I don't need to be taught it. This is the world I live in. Adam rejects that, like, because it doesn't allow for him to be of significance, and him to, or at least the way he saw it, it didn't allow him to contribute and him to participate. And then you have Am Yisrael making that exact same choice with Mount Sinai. We need some Hester Panim. We need a little bit of degree of separation. And then going into Eretz Yisrael, the same exact thing happens. And my understanding of Tisha B'Av, I made a post about it, was just this, like, however much, right, like with the allowance of me to be unique and subjective and all of the things that come along with it, death, chaos, darkness, they allow for newness. Every single time I look at something, I read the same 4 chapters of Eicha every single year, but every single year I read it, due to my subjective location and time and place and mindset and all of those things, a whole new Torah comes out of it, a whole new vision comes out of it. And that is this cycle, and we keep on rejecting Gilui Shechina. Like, we don't want it, right? And every single time we've had it where there was unity of God, we've rejected it. So it's almost like, as it still holds true to me to a degree now, but I was 12 and Mashiach's gonna come, there's after. I'm like, why would I want Mashiach? Like, I'm not gonna be interested in girls, I'm not gonna go to the movies, I'm not gonna care about good food. Like, these are all things I love and enjoy very much. I don't want this messianic era. And there's like something like that. So for me, that subjectivism, which is something I'm like, how do I escape my subjectivism? Like, and it's like, no, it's in my subjectivity. Like, attempting to pursue objectivity and attempting to view reality or truth, emes, that which stands on its own, like that is what we're doing. And all this like dogmatic, like, here's the truth that you get. And I don't know, with Chabad, my problem is like, even if it's the greatest philosophy ever written, as soon as you become attached to one and impervious to criticism from outside, your end is entropy, and the end of entropy is chaos.
It's no longer philosophy, it's dogma.
It's just dogma, and that's not the derech of Hashem, and that's not the derech of Avram, and we get lost. And I think that's what we're all afraid. Like, that's what we're afraid of with all these great figures, is we know how capable people are to being just stupid and following, right? Because we all just want a leader. I don't want to think. I don't want to make choices. I would just, like, what should I do with my life? Rebbe, please tell me. Give me the answer. Like, and I think, so for me, this podcast, thinking aloud, right, which is all this is, where we're just thinking aloud together. Both where thinking is permissible and mistakes are permissible, meaning that play on the sound of the word, and we're thinking aloud, is I guess I'd like to. I don't want to offer answers. I would like skepticism, but then I'd also like myself to be at the same time, like when you have the great philosophers tell you about the meaninglessness and the nothingness of the world, but then somehow you look at them and they're still standing there and they're happy, and like, that's the most reassuring thing in the world. Those people who dive into the chaos and they know nothing, but somehow they're still standing and they have a smile on their face, or they don't. Like, that's who I would like to be, somebody who's capable of jumping into the darkness and somehow not getting lost, or getting lost and then finding my way back out.
The darkness in the end of days, according to the prophets and the Kabbalists, shines brighter than light. This idea.
There we go.
There's this idea that the light of night will be brighter than the light of day. There's a very rich theme that God cloaks God's self. At times the verse says with light, but then at other times it says with darkness. God wraps God's self in darkness, and then darkness that's illuminates. But I think this is really the great paradox of Judaism, and I think the richness that we have in this conversation is to borrow on 3,000 years of cultural discourse and metaphors and imagery and symbolism to verbalize our own quest into the darkness, right? And something that came to me while you were saying something that kind of just like jumped out at me was the very, very last mitzvah in the Torah. So everyone knows there are 613 commandments in the Torah, the Taryag mitzvot. So the very first one is for Adam and Eve to procreate, pur urvu. The very last one is in the end of the book of Devarim, where Moses tells the people, "Va'atem kisvu lachem es ashira hazois v'lamdes me'Yisrael," that each person has a responsibility, as the commandment is learned out by the rabbis, to write for themselves this song, which is the Torah, and with it to teach the people of Israel. So there's a mitzvah incumbent on every single Jew, technically a Jewish male because it's a time-bound mitzvah and the technicalities of that, but in theory every Jew, to write for themselves a Sefer Torah from Genesis to Deuteronomy. How many people actually do that is not so many.
I've written a letter and you get somehow
exactly. So that's the idea. So we to partake in the mitzvah, we buy a letter or we write a letter. There's a big campaign made by Lubavitch Rabbah of Ois B'Sefer Torah, to have a letter in the Torah. And part of the beauty of that is that based on another medrash, that every single Jew themselves is a letter in the collective Sefer Torah. There's a symbolic 613 letters in the Torah. Technically not, but symbolically yes, which goes back to that number we mentioned earlier, the 613 sort of archetypal souls, that every single Jew is a letter in the Torah, which is so beautiful, because if we all know that if a single letter is missing in the Torah, the entire Torah is just invalid and is useless.
Which means the Rebbe made sure we pay attention to is every single
Jew, which means that if your subjectivity, if your letter is not there in the text, in the grand narrative, the Torah is a vain text. It becomes the most holy, sacred object when your subjectivity is there, when mine is there, when everyone is there. That's when it becomes the divine. That's the 613 faces in the text. But part of this idea is that every single person has to write their own Torah as well, which means that there is the Torah. And we're not allowed to write our own made-up Torah. We can't write Jack and Jill, Humpty Dumpty. Like, we have to write Bereshis Barley Him. We have to write the Torah.
It has to be written from another Sefer Torah.
That's right.
Too.
That connects us back to Ze'eli, to the God, to the truths of the past. But no two Torahs are going to be written the same. Right? No one has the same style. No one has the same calligraphy. No one has the same energy, the same intention, the same passion, the cloth, the hide, the parchment will be different. The ink will be different. The sweat that you drop onto the text and smudge with the letters, your pain and your sorrow and your hopes, your Torah will be fundamentally different. And no two Torahs are the same. And the beauty of an altar, you pick up an altar and you see what it went through. What did this Torah scroll see? And we live with those texts, right? We dance with them, we cry with them, we bring them out on our happiest days, and we leave them barren on our saddest days. So there's this obligation to write the Torah, and this duality of the Torah. There's one person in the Jewish population who has a double obligation to write two Torahs. That's the king.
The king, or he has one that he has with him at all times, wrapped around him, and
exactly one that goes with him at all times, that goes out to war with him particularly. It's the war scroll, and one which stays in the palace. And again, we have this beautiful duality. There's the palace Torah. There's the Torah which is pristine, which doesn't get touched, which stays in the treasure house, which is truth for generations, which is the Aron Kodesh, which no one touches, which is Ze'eli, which is the bedrock of our knowledge. But then there's the war Torah. We go to war every day. Every day is a battle, and we take our Torah with us. And yes, it gets damaged, it gets chuffed, and it gets smudged, and it gets stolen. The Ark itself gets stolen, right? In the famous biblical narrative, but those two Torahs have to coexist, and we're not a king with just one, because if we have just one, right, again, then we're stagnant, we're boring, unevolved. God is dead if it's not able to move. So I think the obligation is upon us, right? And I think it's precise that the Torah calls it a song. King David, according to Chazal, is punished for calling Torah a song in the book of Psalms. But over here, Moses and God calls it a song because the vision is at the end of days there will be a new song, right? There will be a shir chadash. There will be a Torah chadash iti teitze, says God. And I think that it's upon us in every generation that has aspirations for messianism, for redemption, for beauty and for kindness, is to articulate that Torah. And the question is, what is that living Torah? What is the war Torah that we create in every generation? What is that song that we're going to sing? And I think it has to be a song of unity. I think it has to be a song. And it has to be a song which is discerning. It can't write, if you just write nonsense in your Torah, even a single letter, it has to be exacting, it has to be demanding, it has to be precise, it has to be rigorous, it has to be scientific. But if we don't do that, then we're done for.
Absolutely. Just Yeah, that guy, that archetypal argument between Yehuda and Yosef, that seems to be at play. Like, when we were in Galus, right, which is where we are, but like there was a certain, we just need to protect ourselves. Like there's a certain, like, let's stay low. Jews, like, we're behind the scenes. We'll manage your money. I'll try to keep my mysticism under wraps. Like I'll engage in your Islamic philosophy, and we're just like and we'll criticize the Sabbateans, and we'll criticize the Karaites, and we have to protect that which is ours and most dear to us. It's all we had is the Torah that we had to keep locked away, the king's Torah in the safe, and almost like prophetic, the fact that Israel is called Israel, and you look at the difference between Yisrael and Yehuda in the books of the Torah. Like, one is Yehuda, Yisrael, like the Yisrael, the David HaMelech narrative is national identity, is this expansion. I stand for something, as opposed to what we were, which is I stand against other things. And so now we're in this, like, okay, so obviously I have 1,000,001 criticisms of the state of Israel and its government, and I was disillusioned over COVID to realize, like, I was all in love and enamored, and all of a sudden COVID disillusioned me from like it's very much a man-made process. But this, like, we have this opportunity to be like, thank God for all the Haredim, and thank God for all the people who are still blocked off and keeping it safe, because it allows for me to go out and screw up. Like, it's the kind of thank you for doing you, and I'm gonna go, and I'll hopefully not be a kofar, and I'll get into heaven or whatever. But like, and I'll be part of the narrative, as opposed to what's forgotten in the narrative, right? Because a lot of what has been written has been forgotten, right? That's one of the mechanisms as like truth tends to last, right? As in falsehood tends to disappear. So that's like, yeah, we have such a luxury, and then we can have this conversation, and people could listen to this conversation, and ideally, I don't know how to figure it out, but I'd like people to be able to participate in the conversation. Like, I'm interested in talking to experts and eccentric people and people who are out of the box, but I'm also like, anybody who I could have a conversation with, I'd like to have the conversation with. And like, because one of the downsides to podcasts is it leaves you with the illusion that you're actually having a conversation, when there's something to be like that you're watching a conversation. You're not having a conversation.
It's still Web 2.0. It's not. It's not quite 3.0.
Exactly. You're right. When Web 3 comes in, this podcast world. So I don't know, it's really refreshing to be able to have a conversation like this.
I like that paradigm of the people who are keeping it in the safe, which gives you the freedom to go out and experiment. There's a great similar paradigm which is employed by Avram Yeshua Heschel, who says he contrasts Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, who had radically different approaches to interpreting Torah. Akiva was like the most creative and aggressive interpreter. Like, every time the Torah said S or ace, which has no translation in English, he would say this: it's here for a reason. We have to learn something new from it. So S is l'rabos, is his expression. It's to add something. So when the verse says Es Hashem lekecha tira, fear the Lord your God, the S doesn't even translate into English. He says it's l'rabos tamid chachamim, to add the sage, that you have to fear the sage too. Or kabid es avicha ve'es imecha is l'rabos achicha gadol, is to add, like, in honoring your parents, you also have to. So he's like incredible, like, creative, and sort of any extra, and like he's. And then Rabbi Yishmael says, no. Dibra Torah b'lashon bnei adam. The Torah is not every word is like, the Torah is speaking to humans. It's going to use human expressions. Like, not everything you just go and make interpretations of. And we, in retrospect, we don't understand perhaps how radically different these positions may have been, right? Because we just lump them all into. They're all, part of Chazal, and therefore they're
Chazal
all like,
says.
They're Chazal, yeah. They're like Taisvis. They're just one monolithic.
Yeah.
But the Gamara says that during the great debate between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel, there were almost two different Torahs in Judaism, almost split into the Judaism of Hillel and the Judaism of Shammai. Like, these were radically different visions. And history has, the tragedy of history is they all become homogenized into one. But so Heschel says very beautifully that Yishmael...
That's not the tragedy. That's what we're looking for, is unity.
But we don't want to lose the richness and diversity in that unity. We don't want it to be we don't want sameness. We want unity in which she has a little nest in there. It's very cute. We want the unity in which we can hold on to the multiplicity. When we can hold on, if all the letters of the Torah, right, become smudged into one big blob that's not a Sefer Torah, we need them to be differentiated. If even the Vav and the Hey are touching each other, we've lost our unity because we're not able to clearly differentiate the grand multiplicity that makes up the unity, right? So I think we lose the beauty of Judaism when it's like all of this Chazal say, right? So which I've probably done 20 times during the conversation. But so Heschel says that
you do a very good job. Something I will work on is like you do a very good job at remembering names and quoting and referencing your sources. So you do like to the degree of which I think if I were to have an easier time listening to your lectures, I would figure out a way for you to not have to say the names, right? Like the Ramble says, I'm not going to quote names for the sake of brevity. Is like my brain just goes what? Like, but yeah. So,
I don't know. I think there's a certain like the things and people that you love, you're able to remember. Like that's how I see it. And like if you're in love, I mean, I don't remember like living people. If you like people tell me their name and it takes me like 20 times to remember their name, I feel so bad until I love them and then I know their name, right? But like these dead people, I love them so much. Like they're part of me.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro had a line. He's like he says something along. He's like, I have much more interesting conversations with the people I read in these books than I do with most of the people around me in the world.
Inevitably.
Like.
Which is a tragedy, but so Heschel says like this. Heschel, who's a magnificent poet, I think the first person to turn me on to a certain form of mysticism, which I hadn't been exposed to in my own Chabad uprising, and I'm thankful for him for bringing a new. He's really this, like in many ways the scion of the Abter of the Abter Hasidic dynasty, and he brings a tremendous poetic and prophetic.
He wrote in Yiddish?
He wrote. This is the crazy thing. So he's writing initially in Yiddish. He spoke something like 8 languages, like one of these polyglots. His English is so exquisite. When I first started reading him, and still sometimes today, I need to sit with it like a dictionary or thesaurus to understand what he's saying. And his poetry is just enough to drive you to your knees in worship, to drive you to awe, which is like such a big theme. AWE is like a huge theme in his writing. He learned English on the freaking boat coming from Europe as a grown adult on the way to America. That's when he learned English for the first time, and like the level of it makes him like it's just crazy to have such power and proficiency and prowess and command of a language. He learned it in his 30s, God damn it. Anyhow.
What to aspire to.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah. Then you think of someone like Shelley who revolutionized English poetry and then died when he was 24 or something. Anyhow, there's a lot to feel inadequate from.
Right, Ramble was done at 29, or R.A. Kaplan was...
We'll have to forgive ourselves. Yeah. We'll have to forgive ourselves for only getting our act together in our late 20s. So he writes like this, that Rabbi Shmuel is the great curator. He's the conserver of Judaism. He's the one that he makes sure here is the treasury, the museum, which is Judaism, and I'm going to make sure that not a single fingerprint is going to deface the truth of the past. And you need Rabbi Shmuel, you need the Haredi to do that. And then you need Rabbi Akiva, who's going to say, I'm going to be an elephant in a China store, and I'm going to break every truth we know, and I am going to begin from the age of 40, right? We don't have to feel so bad because he started at 40, to turn things on its head and to rediscover truth for us, and to interpret every superfluous letter until we have a living and vibrant. And if there was only Akiva, you'd be lost in some sort of vague, sloppy reconstruction of Judaism that has nothing to do with its past. And if you only had Rabbi Shmuel, you'd have a museum which would collect dust and no one would be interested in visiting, right? Not to mention these names together in the same sentence, but Hitler, in his attempt to destroy Judaism, wanted to leave Prague as the museum of the lost people, right? And thank God, we're not just a museum. We're a living artifact, and we're growing, and we're changing, and we're mutating. And part of that is dangerous, right? We may be messing up. We may be doing things that are heretical. And we probably are.
The biggest danger in life is death.
That's the biggest danger. So I think that's the challenge. How do we dance between Akiva and Shmuel? How do we hold?
And do we have to dance? Like, meaning, like, can I trust that there are people holding on, and I can just I can just be radical, and like I don't
know.
Was Mendelssohn, or like where like he was radical. Like the analogy I really like that Jordan Peterson pointed out, I think in his biblical series, of like a field, right? Like it created the sadeh. Like, what is the concept of a field, right? There's a clearing of an area, right? A defined area of space, and then there's the field of psychology, the field of philosophy, field of mysticism, field of science, field of medicine, all these different fields, right? It's this defined space, and at the center of the field is the safest place to be, right? That's where the bonfire is. That's where it's safest. And if you go outside the field into the woods, you're lost.
Yes.
You're not in the field.
Yes.
Where you want to be is at the borders, in 1 foot in, 1 foot out,
yes.
where you're expanding the boundaries of the
yes.
field. And
yes.
I really, really like that,
yes.
but then you have occasionally the analogy that I added onto it, like you have the kofrim, the biggest people who went outside of the field. But what they did is they essentially created almost like a clearing out
yes.
there, and
yes.
we connected
yes.
the two places.
Yes,
And like the modern Orthodox world in Rav Soloveitchik owes their existence to somebody like the Moshe Mendelssohn,
yes.
having made those mistakes
yes.
and failed,
yes.
right? But
because
he made a clearing, and I'm like, there's this part of me who's like, okay, like it's more exciting. Like you get to be out into the wilderness, to be exploring.
Yeah. Those people are really important to me. I mean, someone like Spinoza,
yeah.
right, who's definitely thrown out.
Exactly.
He creates a huge clearing, and I think that Chassidus is not other than it, and it's the bridges. And I think the most interesting. I think you're so right about this. The most interesting place to be. The expression that the metaphor that I've used, which is a very old Jewish profession, is to be a smuggler, right? Jews
yeah, exactly.
Jews who spoke many languages and who had contacts across borders were often their livelihood was in smuggling. There's a joke that was said when countries would come to treaties to remove their borders, like the EU, where you can now move across freely. There's no tax and tariffs. The Jew says, like, like, how does a Jew make a living without borders? So I think being a smuggler, where you're on the boundary of order and chaos, you're on the boundary of the known and the unknown, you're on the boundary of orthodoxy and heresy. I think, because if you're just in heresy, it's dangerous, and it takes someone like a Mendelssohn or someone like a Spinoza to be there and to still be a saintly person.
And you look at the consequences of what happens to their kids, though,
exactly.
which is the real.
Exactly.
That's what keeps me.
Continuity is not something which comes with that profession, although I think they themselves had very profound, and meaningful lives, and then continuity is what happens in the field, right? You're guaranteed that you can pass on the truths. So I think the best place to be is to be dancing on that border, is to be a smuggler, is to be a pirate between the two,
right.
is to wear the clothing of both and speak the language of both and know the tools of both. If you can both sit in a base medrash and learn a shagas aryeh and a ritva and a marsha and a taz and you can also whip out a podcast and be on TikTok and know how to pull out a meme. I think you're a smuggler, and I think that's the best place to be.
It's like and I love the analogy. The Jews have I just started talking about this and paying attention to this now. The whole Freudian and whether he's did he know Yiddish? Of course he knew Yiddish. His mother, and when he uses certain words and translates things, is he smuggling? Like, here's ideas, like when I use the word Yetzer, right? You have all of you, as a Jew, when you read the word Yetzer, you have all of your conceptions throughout all our history of the word Yetzer like, I've encodified myself. And then where Hitler was arguably right was like, is this just a Jewish science, right? Like, or like, and you're just smuggling it, or right, like you're enclothing it in something else, and it's just Jewish science, right? Like it was Mein Kampf, and so we are always like smuggling, like, and you look at all these great Jewish thinkers who weren't known as for their Jewish thinkerness, and you read, and you just read how much like MS and Torah is there, and whether or not we're just reading it in, or they meant to place it there, or there's some type of hashgacha, even if they were unconscious. I love one of the jokes I learned of there's two jokes that Freud wrote that are quite. I don't think he created them. He was probably just hearing them growing up in his house. But there's the joke of Mrs. Cowan at the country club. The waiter comes up and spills hot soup on her, and she goes, oy vey, whatever that means, right? There's this certain, like, the Jewishness, like that pot, like you're in the country club, we're all like, I'm not like here. And then what was the other joke of, I don't remember the other joke, it'll come to me, but there's this, like that, we are the like we're smuggling God in wherever we can. And like this, who's the big guru meditation self-help guy now, bald, every single hack self-help person, like he's their God. He's a chiropractor. What's his name? Whatever. He has all these really good meditation videos on YouTube. But he's like, science is, and he's probably just stealing from somebody else. Science is just the language of mysticism today, right? Like this is, they're just the mystics, right? Whether it's
Spira?
No. Like the most famous
Deepak
self-help.
Chopra?
No.
He's not so much self-help.
Whatever, but like there's we're just we're smuggling in this idea of God within our science, and we're just like, we're all pursuing this unity, right? Everybody's just smuggling in God everywhere they can go.
But I think the smuggling goes both ways, right? There's this really, really wonderful line from Rav Kook, who is like he's such a terrific thinker, and such a, like, I think the real people that get him are the ones that reject him in some sense, right? Because his legacy with the modern Orthodox Datilo Israeli worlds is something of a fallen legacy, I think. I hope I don't offend anyone by saying that.
I love being offensive. Just creates more conversations.
The people, there's like, he's rejected in a lot of the Haredi worlds, whatever that means, because he really is a radical thinker, and he shows the smuggling the other direction too. He's a thinker like people before him, like Hillel Zeitlin, who was deeply engaged in contemporary philosophy, particularly in Nietzsche and in Spinoza, who Rav Kook quotes, and then his students and his son clean up the quotations, whatever it is. But he says that what is everything that happens in existence, and this is both something which he's echoing Torah and echoing Hegel as well in the same breath, happens in sort of the grand process towards unity, towards God. What place does atheism have in the grand march towards God, right? That seems to be the antithesis of a march towards God. And he says that the role that atheism plays, and speaking specifically about the scientific revolution and Nietzsche and others, is that it comes to clear and clean our idea of God, because that our idea of God can collect all of these like what's it called on a ship where you have those
barnacles.
Barnacles which like attach themselves to the ship, and you need to scrape them off. He says that our ideas of God, the same way that we're smuggling God into the forest, right? We need to smuggle the forest into God, into religion, because we
Absolutely.
in today's Jewish world and in other traditions as well, God is like some sort of patriarchal, monarchical alien who comes from out of space, right? Man in the sky who comes to speak, like. And that's clearly not what the mystics think about when they're thinking of God. As soon as God is something other than reality, then you're not talking about God anymore. As soon as God is some sort of even a disembodied consciousness that is separate, like, that's not God, right? So he says that atheism comes to clean our God concept, so that we can actually come to God, right? It's part of the process. It's part of that dialectical, that Hegelian process of affirmation and negation, which brings to the greater synthesis, right? The thesis antithesis. So I think that the smuggling goes both ways. I think we're stealing, right? And or Y.Y. Jacobson is doing a really good job at smuggling, right? Where he's like, there is so much MS, right, out in the world that you're rejecting, and I just need to figure out a way to smuggle it into your conception, which makes our conception of God stronger. Correct.
And then what happens simultaneously is the outside world gets our Kabbalah, they get it translated into Latin, Greek, whatever, they get our Torah, they get our wisdom, and then they become stronger, and like the us versus them, which does exist, is that much harder to make distinctions between, right? Like me as a Jew in America, like 98% of my values, like you could like, is it because I'm Jewish or because I'm American, right? There's a certain lack of distinction. So there's the way it
becomes a mutually enriching process. Where they're able to feel, and I think that's like one paradigm, like from the secular to the sacred, and vice versa. And then a lot of the work which I'm trying to do on the channel which was done by people like Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi and others, is to smuggle between traditions. And this is, and I mean, when I say Reb Zalman, this goes back to someone like a Rambam who was smuggling Sufi practices into Judaism and vice versa. And I think the smuggling happens there too, where, and we didn't get to speak about this, but the particular genius and truth of Jewish mysticism can encounter the particular truth and genius of Islam and Christianity, and we can smuggle between them. We can learn mindfulness from the Buddhist. We can learn zikr from the Muslim, and we have in Judaism what to teach too. And there's no learning without teaching. And I think that sort of the age of religion, where it was this zero-sum game, where it was this competitive economic, where for me to be right, you have to be wrong, and the more wrong you are, the more right I am, and we're going to have a medieval disputation. I'm going to prove you wrong. That is so like Judaism of like of yesterday, and that is so religion of yesterday. We live in a new economy where it's like there's a rising tide that raises all boats. And that's both between traditions and that's between religion and secularity. And to me, that is like a radically new vision. There's a scholar by the name of Shaul Magid who calls it paradigm shift Judaism, working with Reb Zalman particularly. But I think that it's the way forward. And I say that it's new, it's not new. Like we were doing this under Hellenism. Philo of Alexandria was doing this for Judaism. The Rambam was doing this with Al-Farabi and Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd and Ibn Sina. Like this has been happening since forever. This happened during the Renaissance between people like Yonatan Amello and Del Megiddo and Pico del Mirandola and Marcello Ficino. Like this has been happening for hundreds of...
One of the big... Muster Svarm is just a translation into Yiddish from Benjamin Franklin's autobiography.
That happens too.
There's a certain that's stealing, right?
Yes,
there's a certain amount of stealing.
That's a worse version of that.
But it's always right. You said it's always been happening, and again, to me, it's like there's this like it's just they stole it from us, right? And they're just stealing from us.
No,
like
it's such a wrong paradigm. It's such a wrong paradigm. Us stealing from them. Who's older? Who's bigger? Who's better? It's such a yesterday paradigm. The question is, how do we do this now in a way that's really not denigrating either ourselves or the other, but in a way that's so validating? Like, how can I be so deeply Jewish and so rootedly, deeply, richly Jewish in my bones that I'm comfortable enough to learn a Buddhist way of meditating, that I can strengthen my own avodas Hashem through, and this for many people this is like way too far and this is heresy already, but I think it's the work that needs to be done. It needs to be done in a way that's so deeply rooted in our particularity that transcends the necessity for me to be protective over my. I'm so deeply and richly Jewish. There's no fear at all that being inspired by a Christian poet is going to move me away from Judaism even one iota, because it's all bringing me to the unity which is God.
Exactly.
And the question is, how do we do that thoughtfully? How do we do that richly? How do we do that respectfully? How do we do that intelligently? How do we do that respects difference and differentiation and knows that I'm not, I am a Jew and I want to remain a Jew? To me, that is the question for religion for today. And I think the more that we ask that question, the more beautiful of a religion we're able to create.
Wow. Yeah, it's the question. That's my that was what when I'm from birth with hiccups, right? That's the way I put it. I went from I wasn't religious from 12 to 18, 19 years old, and went to yeshiva, and there was a certain shift. But it was whenever I was picking up, whether it was 7 Habits or Flow and any of the self-help books I started with, or the art conversations, and then you start to read a little bit of science, and you start to read a little and then you start to this truth of Torah that I know, you see it here, and you see it here, and I see it here, and I see it here, and it was almost a validate, it's if it's true, and it's and you can and we believe in a world where somehow you can recognize God not from a top-down approach, but from a bottom-up approach. And that means that's my biggest evidence that God is real, and this is true. There is truth, and I pursue it because it's just popping up.
Because truth is just truth. Truth isn't Jewish. Truth doesn't have a bar mitzvah and gefilte fish.
Right.
God isn't Jewish either. Right. This is like a really weird mistake we make. Truth is universal and ubiquitous, and you can discover it wherever you see it, and it's that which is there. And that, as you're saying, that strengthens our truth. I went through my own hiccup period. Mm-hmm. And really encountering mysticism in other traditions was wow, this thing that I've been taught is also being discovered by other traditions. How much more true is my truth? and how much more beautiful and rich and diverse and complex and nuanced. So I think that those two, like, how do we see truth? Am I true, like, only if I'm true? And it's challenging because, like, if we think about this as some kind of relationship, right? Like, you're a married man, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're in a relationship with your spouse. So to you, she's like the beauty and truth of your life, right? And may it be so for many years, I hope so. But you're not oblivious to the fact that there are many married people in the world, and they have, a partner in their life, which is also, a core beauty and value and something which they inspires them. So
maybe I should be married to their wife, right? Like, is that like
exactly? So there's a sense where, like, oh, if I recognize beauty in someone else's partner, then that's like some sort of infidelity on my behalf, and that's a very insecure place to be in a relationship, right? Ideally, a relationship should be so strong that it's like, no, I'm so in love with my partner that I can yes, I could see another relationship, and I could learn from their relationship how to be a better spouse. Oh, like, I was at their table for a Shabbos meal, and I saw the husband got up to clear the plates before the wife did, and let her sit and wow, I want to do that in my house. Like, like, that comes from a place where the most central thing is your relationship with your wife, and you're not looking to replace it with someone else's relationship. You're not looking to give up your relationship with God to embrace, the Buddhist nothingness or the Allah of Islam. Like, you're looking to see how we're all serving one central truth, and how do I, from a place of deep confidence and security, take on more truth and more beauty and more goodness. And I do this all the time. I watch people, Jewish or otherwise, in their religious worship and practice, and I'll notice they do something in their devotion, in their worship, in their prayer, in their humility, in their gratitude. I'll be like, damn, that's good. I want to do that too. I want to bring that in. Reb Zalman called the spiritual voyeurism, right? Where you're watching another relationship, and the great cosmic, like, irony of this is that we believe that it's not different people that we're in love with. We're all ultimately in love with the same reality, and that's perhaps where the analogy breaks. Is that these are all paths to what we believe is the same truth.
It's interesting. You sent me The Art of Loving, right, from Eric Fromm.
Yeah.
And that was one of the books that changed my life. And I have to reread it. One of those books I read it multiple times over years, because someone got up and said, like, and I got married at 20, so, like, and I'm a little schnook in yeshiva, and he's like, and if you were to read my journals of like okay, I have the girl, and like the amount of anxiety and stress, like, you just read it in the journals, and it's like there was this line that stuck. It's like, you can't say I love you if you don't first have I, right? You can't if you don't have a conception of self, right? Eric Fromm does mature love versus immature love. I love you because I need you, right? And that's immature love, and I need you because I love you, and like this, but. When I was reading Eric Fromm, who grew up, his father was a chief of Frankfurt, Germany, if I'm not mistaken, and he grew up in a very Jewish household, and he, say, rejected it and left it, but the values come through. But I almost conceived of it, right? He's like, you can't be loving and love this and not love that. Love is just like, you have to love everything. There's like an indiscriminate unity to your love, and that's where I almost think he's a little wrong. Is that he's like the vision of Avraham prior to Avram coming to the realization that he has to choose one of his kids. Because in the end of the day, right, what is the whole first book of Bereshit is like, in the 10th and final test, this is a take I really like, there's like, what's the test? Oh, he had to take up his son and put him on the altar? Like, is that the test? Like, if God came out and spoke to you and told you what to do, and you believe, like, and you had this, like, how is that a test? You just go do it. The difficult part for him was, take your son, your only son, the one that you love, and that dialogue that Rashi fills in. What do you mean? I have to, like, and him, I have to select one, and I have to be discriminate and have din and gevura of some sort and select. That was his, and so I think I was like,
and then kill your darling.
And then kill it. Like, nonetheless, and but
you're saying, as opposed to Fromm's universal.
There is. We need the discrimination and distinction. I think Fromm might have got lost in whether the Frankfurt school or like a little bit, but nonetheless, Yeah.
I think Fromm's point is perhaps reconcilable with what you're saying, because it's been some time since I read the book. From what I remember him arguing there, is that we conceptualize love as like this thing that we possess, right? Like I want to be in love with another person, and like something that's going to be utinous. And for the first half of the book at least argues that love is a state of being which you have to be. Like you have to be love, so that like when there's someone that can come into your life, and it's very different. Instead of like being this object-oriented thing, it's like, oh, if only there was some perfect person who then could be the recipient of my love, then there would be love in my life. And Fromm's like, no, you have to make love in your life.
Yeah.
And then people will be able to come into that, and you can hold them in that. So I think that there's maybe space for both, where like you can be love, you can be the like the love of God. There's this beautiful piece of Zohar, I think it is, where it says that while Avram lives, the sphera of Chesed is on vacation. While Avram is alive, the sphera, the divine attribute, the divine quality of loving kindness, is on a paid leave, basically. It's not the exact language of the Zohar, but basically that it's nostalgic. It ascends back into the pleroma of some sorts, and the reason is because Avram is the conduit of Chesed, and he becomes the living spirit. That's what it means to be Merkava, right? He is the chariot of the divine. He is love. He becomes divine love in the world. In that what was doing that role previously, what was the cosmic metaphysical channel that is basically become redundant, because Avram has become the sphere of Chesed. So Fromm is saying, as far as I understand him, you must become love, and then there can be particulars, and those particulars will be particular, right? You won't love any random woman that walks down the street as much as you love your wife, but it's going to be built on a foundation of you being loving, and that will manifest in you being kind to the stranger, and you being and his Judaism and his prophetic ethic really comes through both in that book and in his other works as well.
I've only read Escape from Freedom, which is unbelievable.
What's his other one? Something in Civilization. Like the whole last quarter of the book is just him repeating like all of the best parts of the prophets. Basically, he's very deep in that. So I think that it's able to. We're able to have both. We're able to hold something in a universal sense and to particularize it, and they're not mutually exclusive, but they're mutually interdependent.
Do you have a watch on so we can tell the time?
There was one.
I do have to pick up my kid.
2:15.
Still good.
There was one other thing that you said that triggered a thought, and the thought escaped me now.
Come back to me now. I hear that spirit calling me. Yeah, the way I heard Rav Kook is, I mean, I didn't hear from Rav Kook. I heard something else. Like we owe everything to atheism because, like, they're absolutely correct. God does not exist.
Right.
Like he in any which way you can conceive of anything or any one existing or any existence, he does not exist that way.
Yeah.
Right? He is primal existence.
Yes.
He is
Yeah, it's a very weird thing that happens in theology, and Chassidus really gets very deep into this point where God is that which exists, which does not need to exist to exist. It's let me see if I can remember the tongue twister in Hebrew. It's how does it go in Hebrew? Mitzias bilti mechoiv mitzias nimtza. That which is without needing to that which is without needing to be isness, basically. Right. There's actually a very funny. I say funny, but I think it's being done seriously. The Rebbe reads the very first line of Mishnah Torah, right? Which every kid that went to yeshiva knows. That that the foundation of all foundations, and this is Rambam's like his opening like catechism. This is like what the Jew must believe, and he believes that it's demonstrable like on Aristotelian metaphysics and logic. Like it's not even a matter of faith. He doesn't use the word faith there at all. Right. It's just like science for him.
Right. The first mitzvah is Leda. It's not Emunah. It's to faith. It's to know.
So he writes to know that there is this primal being, this first cause, whatever it's going to be translated, Matsu Rishon. The word matsui actually is a great word in English, in Hebrew, because it means that which is found, which is the same in Arabic. Wujud, which is being, is also that which is discovered or found. And in English, it's not the same, which has, there's a sense of discovery embedded into it. It's the first which is to be found, which is quite nice, which doesn't translate into when we say existence, right? It's a bit more static. Anyhow. And this first existence, this first found thing, brings everything else that's found into being from its own existence. And then the Rambam writes, if you're going to contemplate the thought that God does not exist, and basically goes on to enumerate all the reasons why you'd be wrong. Basically saying that nothing else at all could exist either, right? Something. Like there's no other mitzius if the existence of God doesn't exist. The Rebbe reads this exactly what you're saying now, in line with Rav Kook, which is just such a great reading, and it's so beautiful how Judaism really does not care to turn a text on its head. This is way before the postmodernists were doing it. This is definitely and to be fair, talking about smuggling Judaism or Jewish silence. Derrida was Jewish. These guys are all Jewish.
Yeah.
So and they're doing something very Jewish in what they're doing. So the Rebbe writes like this, that there's one level of belief, which is Yesod from the Chachma. This is your ground A, where you start off. That God exists, and that's what we teach children, right? God exists, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere, right? V'im yala haladas. If you've learned some Chassidus, if you learned some Kabbalah, if you've had an aliyas hadas, im yala haladas, if you ascend, shu einay matzui, that God's existence is beyond existence, that God does not exist in the way that we talk about things existing, then you've come to the truth, because nothing exists, and God's existence is beyond existence, which is topsy-turvy reading Rambam. But it's this point that our categories of existence, and this the Zohar says that antu chad v'lo b'chushbana, right? In Pasach Eliyahu, we read this on Fridays from the introduction to Tukkunei Zohar, that when we say God is one, we don't mean God is one like the cup is one. We don't mean God is none of our categories work for God anymore. And this is Rambam's point, that even existence, and this is what Plotinus says, that God is hyper-uzia, God is beyond existence. And this is, I think what you're saying, Rav Kook is reading from the atheists, that if we think about God as some sort of being that exists in our categories of being, we are committing the greatest heresy. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing is we're reducing God to an object. We're objectifying God, which means that God is something that can be possessed, something that can be known, something that can be grasped, something that can be quantified and measured. And God is none of those things. God is that which we will never reach. And that's in the Hebrew word of matzui. It's that which is always being found. Right? The chayker. It's interesting. What word do we use in Judaism for a philosopher? We call it. So we do translate philosoph in modern Hebrew. And the same way that Arabic translates falsafa as philosophy, but an organic Hebrew word is chakira. Chakira is philosophy in Judaism, mm-hmm. and the choker is the one who literally investigates. In modern Hebrew, choker is like an investigator, a researcher, a private eye is called a choker in modern Hebrew, because while in Greek the etymology is beautiful, philosophy is the lover of wisdom, philosophia, which is beautiful. Wisdom as applied knowledge. How do we take knowledge and love it enough that we want to bring it into our lives? It's beautiful, but the Hebrew connotation is slightly different, and here's the beauty, the richness of language and diversity. That it's a chakira. It's this act of investigating. It's looking for the matsui. It's looking for that which can be discovered, which we can never really discover. It's v'ligdulato en cheker, says King David, that God's greatness can never be discovered. And so the choker is
cheker and Kate. The Rambam also says in the mitzvah of to love God. How do you come to love God?
Right.
Essentially drill into His existence. You
right.
come to realize that it's en Kate and cheker. It's
correct. So being involved in the chakira of that thing which is ein cheker, is there any more beauty in the darkness? Knowing that, and there's a sense of the choker is not the one who gives answers, right? Socrates is put on trial and put to death in Athens, not because he teaches the wrong conclusions. He's put on trial for teaching children to question, right? He makes the youth question. And whereas in ancient Greece, he is forced to drink a cup of poison for doing that. And we have that tremendous painting from Raphael where Socrates is holding up his goblet and he's giving his last great drasha to his students, and Plato is sitting there transposed, because he's only later in history, sitting there contemplating backwards the scene as he writes the Apology. He's one of his great dialogues. But in Judaism, as opposed to murdering the people who question, we enshrine and institutionalize, we force questions. The Pesach Seder, perhaps the central method of transmitting the Jewish narrative throughout the generations, is a night of questioning. There is the 4 questions of the 4 sons, right? The manishtana, which we force the child, no matter how embarrassing it is, to get up and say. And then, if you ever studied the halachas of the Pesach Seder, there are 10,000 things that we do in the night, like Jews do, because we're a bit neurotic when it comes to details. Some of them have reasons, most of them...
Just so they would ask questions.
Kadesh Yeshal Tzanekis, like you read Mishnah Berurah, you read like the Mechaber Rama. Why do we do this? Why do we do that? So the children ask, which is so, like in Judaism, usually we have an answer for everything. The answer is not an answer, it's a question. The reason we're doing this is so that people question. So I think that spirit of questioning, the spirit of chakira, after that thing which has ein cheker, ve'ein kates, ve'ein tachlis, is like, I love that part of our tradition. And
what's the difference between what makes, in order for something to be the highest possible aim, it has to be unachievable. Otherwise, because if you get there, then people are like, oh, I'm going to be the best athlete, best Olympic swimmer in the world. Okay, I have 8 medals. Now what do I do? That was a goal. That wasn't an aim.
Right.
Like that was a framework that I made with my friend Zach. Like, how do you decide whether something is a aim or a goal? And if you can get there, then it's just a goal.
Right.
And it goes into like what I believe is right. I'm not trying to fit Judaism into Buddhism or any other. I think it's the highest possible aim, right? With Dea Mitis, knowing God, like putting that as your top of your aim. The Rambam puts it, it demands of you everything else in your life. Your midos have to be in check. Your character, you have to know Torah. You have to do all the mitzvahs. You have to do all. It demands of everything, but also encompasses everything. It says, which is yotel gadol limud or maisa, right? And it says limud because it golim
gadol limud shmei v'li maisa,
right? Because limud leads to Mysis. So what the hell does that mean? Right. So then you're saying Mysis is more important. What I think it is they're asking, what do we put at the top of the hierarchy?
Right.
Because if I put Mysis at the top, it doesn't demand everything. When you put Dea Mitis under it demands Mysis. It and the Balatanya almost points this out in either in Shaykh al-Vamuna or in Igeres Tshuva, because they're the only things I've been through fully. He says, like, this is Limud Garim the Maisa, and you could essentially, and then you're like, what are you talking about? We have all these people learning in base medrash all day, and their midos are horrible, and their character traits are horrible, so clearly that's a falsehood.
Right.
So, no, this is a litmus test.
Right.
If your Maisa, if your embodiment of it, that means you weren't really learning. Like that's what that means. It's not that Limud doesn't go on the Maisa, it's that you were not doing Limud. And that there's, like, that's how we quantify it. And, like, what's the best way to judge a philosophy or a theology is look at its adherers and see how they act in the world, right? And like people are like, oh no, how could you do that? Like you look at all of the Christian followers, right? And then you saw they did whatever they come and slaughter all of the Crusaders, right? Like, and they're all about love, but then you see what happens in action and the discrimination. Or you look at places that take in Buddhist philosophy, and then the entire country is living in poverty, and they're all missing. Like, there's a certain missing of something. Like, and what better way to judge a philosophy than its adherers? By
the truth thy shall know them.
By the truth I shall.
Sorry, no. By their fruit.
By their fruit shall know them. And that's, go back to Eden. What was Chava's sin? Hashem said, do not eat from the tree in the center of the garden, right? Or b'toch hagan, right? And she made a distinction, do not eat from the fruit of the tree in the center of the garden.
Right.
And there was no distinction, if you look prior, of the tree and its fruit.
Right.
And the Midrashim talk about how you were able to look at a tree and you could tell which fruit it produced, and you look at its fruit and you were able to, and they would taste the same, right? The esrog taste, like there was a certain integrity of the fruit and the labor in its fruit, or your identity in that which it produces. And what we live in, the world we live in now, is one where hypocrisy and paradox, like where you can be unintegral.
Yes.
There was this awesome TED talk given by she was Brad Pitt's girlfriend, Jewish girl. She was an I forget her name, Israeli architect and designer, and she based her life's work off of where the fruit tree tasted, based off of that pasuk. And she's like, I wanted to create with designers and engineers, a single material that you can use to create everything. Like, so everywhere from the foundational beams of the building and the glass windows, and it's like this mixture of like silkworms and 3D printed, like this organic, or this obsession with organic architecture, where like everything is made out of one, where our fruits are expressive of us, and that's who we are. And the way I understand, right, so the Rambam is mistranslated in Sefer Mitzvos in Hebrew as to saying that the mitzvah is emunah, right?
Yes.
Like his mistranslation pretty clearly, because he in many other places says leda. Yeah. But the Sefer Chinuch, who does explicitly say emunah. So in this attempt to fuse the two, is right, you have chachma, bina, and das. And right, so in das being like this bridge between the two, like chachma is that which I know, bina is how do I apply that which I know, but then how do you get from what I know to it is an awareness. Das is the awareness of that which I know. So when I'm like, right, like I know I have a leg, but it's not until I break my leg that I'm aware of the fact that I have a leg, and then I have to walk differently, and it shapes who I am. So what is that mitzvah is the way amuna, right? Oman, or someone who, or like we're in Hebrew use it as a personal trainer or an artist, someone who molds things. So to be molded by that which I know was the way I heard it from my Rebbe or Heschel. And to be molded by that which I know, that's what amuna is. It's not like a leap of faith. It's like this pursuit of knowledge and awareness, and to have my being and my existence be reflective of that.
Yeah, I love that. The original sin is the divorcing of the tree from its fruit, of our beliefs from our actions. That's the original sin. That's really wonderful stuff. I think about this all the time when I think about contemporary philosophy. Two characters that have perhaps the closest metaphysics to each other, Spinoza and Schopenhauer. They're both monists, right? In Spinoza's ethics and Schopenhauer's the world is will and representation. They basically come to the same, almost identical arguments. I mean, yes, there are differences, and people that are in the field will spend a long time on the differences. But from the outside, there's more similarity than difference. However, in their personal lives, they couldn't be two different people. Schopenhauer, and maybe no fault of his own, like he had a very rough childhood. He's rough. His mother was very tough on him. Parents were divorced. Like I'm not here to like cast judgment on a dead guy, but they say he was a real piece of work. Like he was, like, from the few anecdotes that we have of him, he was just really like a terrible dude, and he got into a lifelong fight with Hegel, and like there's a narrative of anecdote of he kicks this woman down the stairs because she's annoying him, like just a really terrible dude. Spinoza, from everything we know, is like just a saint. He's a tzaddik. His father passes away, and he's in court, and he wins the court case for his father's estate against his sister. But he has no need for like material possessions and objects because he's a pure philosopher. And like as soon as he wins, he like just gives all the money to his sister. It's like, here, you can, like, he stood for principle, like there was law and justice, and he was the rightful inheritor. But then he like, and we know that through and through, like that he really stood for what he believed in. When he lived in The Hague, his landlord saved his life more than once, because at the time there was, without getting into the politics of the Netherlands of the 1800s, but there was a group known as the House of Orange, who were the Republic, and there were like some fanatical Catholics who wanted to overthrow the House of Orange, and he very much believed in this political party, and he was, he's the person who gives us the formulation of separation of church and state. That's a Spinozistic idea, and he saw that his ideas were falling apart because of this new political movement, and he goes out to protest. And he would have been torn limb by limb by the protesters, and his landlord locks him in his room, doesn't allow him to leave, and instead he puts out like a little cardboard sign, which may have been the first cardboard protest, or like, but anyhow, we see like it's a man who's deeply his ethic, and his book is called The Ethics, is deeply permeates every fiber of his being, and his metaphysic is a unitive one, right? He believes that that all there is God, and his ethic is deeply in line with that. We did a whole series on the channel on looking at Spinoza's relationship to mysticism and Kabbalah, but he lives that, and it makes me think of, I think it's Masechtas Brachas, a pretty well-known Gamara, of this person who's talking to a tree, which is a good practice. I recommend people talk to trees a bit more often. Okay. And he says that the tree is really perfect. He's praising the tree. Your shade is magnificent. You're right near the water. You get rain all the time, and your color, your complexion is just gorgeous, and your smell is just like the smell of Gan Eden. And he says, Elon b'mea v'archachacha, like tree, oh tree, with what can I bless you? And the only blessing you can give him is that your fruits will be like you. And I think this is really an important blessing for people that are involved in the world of thought, right? Because we're steeped in poetry and in music and in art and philosophy and in the best that humankind has ever produced. And the blessing that we can bless ourselves and each other is that our fruits will be like us. That means both our own actions will live up to our aspirations, to our aims, and not just our goals. And that which we birth into the world, like our intellectual fruit, our spiritual fruit, our children, that they'll be. I'm always so concerned that when you share material with the world, inevitably you create an audience and a community and a family, people around that. And what if the energy that I'm putting into the world has an element of that's tainted with ego or with falsehood or with some idol, and that seeps into the people that I attract, and I create something ugly. I'm terrified of that, right? So the bracha that we say is Elon, that our fruit should be like us.
Amazing bracha. Probably a good thing. Yeah.
And like the best of us, right?
Yeah, with the joke of the ethics professor who got in trouble for sleeping with his students, right. And he's like, well, you don't get upset at the geometry professor for not being a triangle.
Right.
Yeah. But we do take it much more personally. Right, there's certain, when when horrible things like the author of Kids Speak and all the stuff that comes out, it. Versus any other human being who would act that way, where it would be that's horrible and despicable. There's a whole that's horrible and evil, but there's a whole level of despicability that it becomes apparent when you lack integrity and you preach something that you don't practice.
I think there's a particular Jewish ethic there where we don't allow our leaders and thought leaders and teachers to not represent what they teach. I think in other traditions that's in ancient Greece, there's been more flexibility. In philosophy today, you can teach ethics. You don't have to be an ethical person. I think that in Judaism, rightfully so, we conflate a person's actions with their behavior.
But then, you have these great minds. It's this goes into we tend to reject their whole Torah, right? We reject everything from them, and that's I think where we we're. So
I don't think that's what we advocate in Judaism. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. And Mishnah is a very primary text for all of rabbinic Judaism, which says that there's 4 types of students, right? I can't remember which parak it is in the Mishnah, but there's the student which is in one ear out the other, and they're compared to 4 different instruments. So there's a funnel, just whatever comes in one side goes out the other side. Then there's a bucket that just whatever comes stays. There's no discernment, whatever you put in, it's going to stay there. Bar sid enu ma b'tipa is what another Mishnah says. It's this lime-coated cistern which doesn't lose a drop. And then there is the sieve and the sifter. I'm not sure exactly how they're being distinguished, but the point is basically one of them sifts and it gets rid of all the good and it keeps the solace, keeps the bad. It's the person who goes to the class just to hear the scandal, just to catch the person out, just to find how they can cancel someone. That's the. And then there's the person who is able to let go of all the bad and keep all the good, because in all the teaching there's going to be good and bad. And I think even with great, and I think this is very true, and I think that we cannot, people that have messed up, because we're human, we cannot throw out all of their wisdom. We don't throw out all of Picasso because he was a terrible abusive spouse and partner. We don't throw out R.D. Laing and his insights into insanity because he was an alcoholic. We don't throw out Alan Watts because he didn't respect the people, his children.
We don't throw out Cyclone A, which is a pesticide that was used to kill Jews.
Right. So that takes a lot of balance and equanimity and wisdom and maturity to be able to realize that our teachers are flawed and that they have what's the expression? glass feet or clay feet, whatever the expression is. Even Reb Zalman, who I'm very deeply moved by, and I see myself as following in his footsteps in many ways.
Reb Zalman.
Shechter Shalomi.
Okay.
He was not he was a person who had a lot that he left to be desired in his relationships, and particularly challenge. I think many of these guru figures challenge when it comes to being intimate and being faithful and being particularly in those areas, and it's sort of an unbounded love. It's like too much chesed without gvura.
Yeah, you have the fumtar agra, which is a massive anybody who's great. Like I automatically I know you struggle way more than anybody else struggles.
Yeah,
like that.
That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, "Kol mi shegadol mechaver yitzur gadol himeni." That the greater the person is, the greater their desires are.
Right.
But I think the wrong answer is therefore to just throw out everything they said, whole cloth, to throw out the baby with the bathwater, because then we're left bereft and we can't learn from their goodness. And there's a childlike innocence which demands a purity and justice, because children are pure and therefore they demand purity. And the child says, throw it all out, right? It's the adult who has sinned, who has fallen, who has messed up, and knows what it means to mess up, and knows what it means to be a complex combination of good and bad, right? Ever since Adam and Eve ate from the tree where Mu'ur Tov Ra, there is no pure good and pure evil anymore. And we know that in ourselves. What is it, Dostoevsky, who said that the line between good and evil runs down the heart of every single person. So
the source of all evil is within, with Carl Jung.
Right. So once we recognize that in ourselves, we're no longer children, we're mature adults. We can recognize that in our great teachers and preachers, that they messed up too. And Judaism doesn't whitewash. Thank you. Its leaders. It tells us when King David messes up. But
we still have to believe unbreakingly that he never sinned, whatever that means. That's a whole nother conversation on that. But there is, I do think we're, at least in my upbringing, we were guilty of this whitewashing of painting idyllic, whether it's the art scroll like characters of tzaddikim, and
it's so un-Jewish. It's so deeply un-Jewish. The same Gamara which says, "Kol mi she'omer she'David chata in eletaya," is the same Gamara which reads Tehillim, which King David says, "V'chatasi negdi sameh," that my sins are before me all the time. There's all sorts of creative readings of how to bring them together, but we don't do that. We don't create. We do sometimes.
The way I like that is what we're saying here is his, he didn't, even from his mistakes, it somehow gets incorporated into the grander picture.
Yes.
They didn't get left behind, right? Even the Gemara's, the opinions that we don't hold by, they're still written there in the Gamara, or there's that where we miss the mark is as important.
Yes.
Because if we just show you, here's all of our success reels, you don't get to learn from any of the mistakes. But as soon as you get to learn from a mistake, it's the greatest gift in the world. And
I think there's no one greater than David who we learn that from. We in the book of Psalms in the 50s, in the Nuns there, where he has the Psalms of lament and of repent. They're so immense, and for anyone that has ever messed up in life, and that's most of us, I think it's 52, 53 there, where he pours out his soul, where he speaks from a place of brokenheartedness. And he does it to the prophet Nathan, right? And we read this every Shabbos morning. We read this every night in Kriya Shema before we go to sleep, because David is the quintessential leader, right? He is the king. He's the Lion of Judah. He's the Messiah at the end of days. Not because he doesn't mess up, because he messes up and he takes responsibility and he stands up for his faults. And he prays and he's contrite and brokenhearted for his sins. V'chatasi negdi sameh means that they stand with him at all times, because they stand as a safeguard for him to protect him from messing up again, which is Rambam's definition of tshuva. But also because they allow him to climb on them. The difference between the tzaddik and the rasha, say Chazal, is not that the tzaddik doesn't sin, is that when the rasha sins, he allows the sin to keep him down in the mud, and to say, I am a sinner, and to identify with his wrongdoing, and to never get up again, and to give up on himself. The tzaddik is Sheva Yipal Tzaddik V'Kam. The tzaddik falls down 7 times and gets back up again, and falls back down and gets back up again, and again and again and again and again. That's what makes the tzaddik. To err is human. to forgive is divine, and we need to forgive ourselves. When you said something from, and I forgot what I was going to say. When you said from says that to be in love, there needs to be an I that's in love. I think this ties back to the same point where the verse in Leviticus, I believe it is, says "V'ahavta l'recha kamecha," you must love your friend as yourself. If there is no self, then there's nowhere to love, right? Which means that the same way that we're able to hold space for ourselves and for our own fallings and shortcomings, and to get back up again, and to have the divine forgiveness for ourselves as well, right? The same way that we would do that for another, we could do it for ourselves. Then we can extend that to others. We can extend that to the visionaries, to the poets, to the teachers, to the rabbis, who have messed up and must be held accountable. But we can also have place to learn from them. And I think in today's society, it's a real problem. It's something which is being battled, like today on Facebook and Twitter and social media and TikTok, where what do we do with people that messed up, right? And
there's no path to repentance. You're forever like the Kevin Hart, like he's like, I'm not going to apologize again because I already apologized for that. And if you didn't accept my apology then, why would you accept it now? And
I think it's a deeply un-Jewish idea. I think Judaism, Judaism has many incredible things which it teaches the world. One of them is the notion of tshuva, and tshuva, as read by the Jewish mystics, is straight up supernatural. It has the power to change time. The way that they read the rabbinic corpus is doinus nasik schuyas, that one's sins becomes their merits.
Yeah.
Which means that we literally go back and rewrite history.
Right, that's David Melech. Right?
Yeah, and that's what it means that David Melech sins.
And he came out of an incestuous relationship between a father and a daughter, right? He's a descendant of Lot and
Correct.
his daughters.
Correct.
And like this,
Correct.
Out of this darkness, and
Correct.
The ultimate redemption.
Correct.
Is
Yes.
embodied.
Yes. And I think that's why the Gemara doesn't want us to say that, doesn't want us to dismiss. Yeah. We have to hold on to our humanity. We're not perfect, and we can't expect people around us to be perfect. And if we expect that from ourselves, and I think that for all of the beauty and striving in the social justice spheres today, and many of the ideals I think are deeply Jewish, and they ring in my soul. I think maybe one place where Judaism can speak to that conversation is to stop striving for perfection, both in ourselves and others, because perfection is a deadly thing. To strive for humanness, for a place that allows ourselves to mess up. We're allowed to have days when we're not feeling in the groove. We're allowed to have weeks and months where we're just feeling like a waste of space. And if we demand perfection, those moments will lead us to suicide, because we see what we see on our screens. We see the celebrities who always look perfect. We see the Instagram reels, which are always with their perfect,
all the ums
bikini
and butts
buddies.
came out of it also.
Exactly,
when you give a philosophical speech.
And I do that myself. I cut out my ums and butts.
Oh, I sound so good right there.
I'm as guilty as anyone else for doing it. And I think that's really dangerous, because we create ideals which we cannot live up to ourselves, and we hold ourselves to standards that we can't. And we need characters like King David, who fall and get up again. We need imperfection. We need bloopers. We need and that's what allows us to get through our periods when we're not living up to our ideals.
Amazing. I think that's a good way to end, because otherwise I'll be rushing and my daughter's sweating. Ride my bike here. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Keep up seeking.
My
It's
pleasure.
really good.